Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Julia. She had long ago gotten used to the fact that some envious people in the village called her a cripple. What can I say? A wheelchair has never made anyone look good. Well, what could she do then? She vaguely remembered the time when she was young and happy with her own husband. Peter, the couple married in their third year of medical school. She an up-and-coming internist, he a dentist, the hope, so to speak, and the brightest minds in medicine, but had lived together for a long 5 years after their marriage. When Julia was walking home from work one evening and met her old friend, Tony, her first childhood love, with whom she lived in the same house, though on different floors, and with whom she had spent her entire childhood, her school years. And then you met him and married him. Tony often blamed her for Julia marrying Peter and moving to another town. Tony, but you know I love him. And you're my best friend. I invited you to the wedding, by the way, and you never showed it up. Who's supposed to take offense to that? Come on, you know how I feel about your husband, don't you? I don't. After what he did to you on the third or fifth date, I'm sorry, but you should have thought about it by now. And really, Peter went crazy on the fifth date. He got jealous of Tony and raised his hand to the girl in front of witnesses. She only got a slap on the wrist, but maybe Tony's right. She should have thought about it from the start. Is her boyfriend really that good? Is this toxic relationship worth continuing? Tony, let's just change the subject. I just came over for tea and to talk about life. How are you doing anyway? Yeah, I'm good. Yesterday, my boss offered me the job of chief accountant. And I'm still thinking yes or no. What's there to think about? You'll be counting my money later. Yeah, you tell me, when was the last time you were at work or after your husband beat you up and made a scene at work? Did you quit? Yeah, that incident set the line between Julia and Tony. Although what to say, the girl from the first day won the respect and trust of both her patients and superiors, senior doctors, kindness, ability to spread to herself, and listen to many knowledge and ability to accurately diagnose. All this made her popular among old ladies. Yes to her, Julia. There is a clue lined up for you again, the superintendent used to say to her when she was making her morning rounds. Yes, Julia, again I'm without lunch and will sit until evening. But you understand, I know that besides me no one will listen to them, will not believe. Pressure will not prescribe the right treatment. Yes, I have an old man here. And so he comes to me every day like to work, all because he lives alone and has no one to talk to. Julia, you're doing great. And Julia blossomed at work among the old guys in the women's group. But apparently, Peter thought otherwise and saw his girlfriend, and then his wife blossom before his eyes. Even in such a seemingly backward society. Julia, confess, you have a lover at work. Is it a young grad student or a new doctor? Peter, don't be silly. You're the only man I have, the first and the last. You're all I have. And she reached out to him for a kiss. But the man pushed her away and slapped her across the face. Yes, so hard that Julia hit her head on the door jamb and fell, hitting the corner of the table. The consequences were most unfortunate. Bruising, concussion, ER and ICU, and then she was fired from her job. She just couldn't work there. She couldn't stand the slanted stares of her coworkers, the pitying, wailing of her patients. And Julia had become disgusted with herself. Where did I go wrong? How could I let it be thought that I had a lover? Tony, help me out here. Julia, just get away from him. Come to my place. I've got a 3-bedroom, I live by myself. Vaughn, really with a cat. I'll give you a room. What are you holding on to Peter for? She didn't know what kept her with that man. Is it attachment, love, or desire? What desire to be a mother? Maybe it's a good thing she lost the baby after that blow. Otherwise, she simply did not know how to live her life. Then this word often came up in her vocabulary, but in no way helped to determine the future. Maybe she should divorce Peter, move in with Tony, and go back to work when the bruises and abrasions went away. Julia had been stupid to say that out loud, naively assuming that no one was home. Peter called her in the evening and said that after work he was going to a bar with his friends to have a beer and let her do what she wanted. It's happened a lot in the last 6 months. Constant drunkenness of the husband, his delays at work, meetings with girls. And it wasn't always coworkers. More and more often prostitutes. But on this particular evening, he came home early and heard something that wasn't meant for his ears. I wonder if that's the Tony who's your housemate. Peter, you're home early. I wasn't expecting you, I'm sorry. I didn't even have time to heat up dinner. Yeah, I can see you weren't expecting that. I'm surprised you managed to get your lover Tony out of the house. Must have been the bed. Yeah, well, that's a coincidence. When her husband heard something that wasn't meant for him, and strangely enough, Juliet actually changed the linens before he arrived and threw them in the wash. It was an evening she would remember for a long time. The blow to the face, the fall, then the bump against the corner of the table and the ambulance crash, and then Tony the wheelchair and the incomprehension of how she could have gotten to this point. Julia, you should not despair. You are a doctor yourself, and you know very well that you can still get back on your feet. Tony was with her the whole time she was in the hospital, sitting by her side, spoon-feeding her, reading books, taking her for walks in a wheelchair. The doctors themselves did not understand how it could be that a young and healthy girl could lose her legs from a trivial fall. How could she lose her legs? They just stopped listening to her. She was fine. They said the bruises would go away sooner than her stomach, and she'd be back on her feet. Come on, Ethan, thanks for the encouragement. But I'm a medical professional myself, and I realize that when you're nervous, your legs can fail. So we just have to wait it out. And Julia, I gave you a sick leave so you wouldn't lose your job and have some money, and there. And if anything, I'll get a pension and go somewhere in the village to fresh air and fresh milk. With such words, she consoled herself, but she understood perfectly well she could not stand on her feet, and all her life would be confined to a wheelchair. That's how her husband ruined her youth, her health, and her desire to become a mother. When Peter beat her, Julia was pregnant. She didn't know it yet, but her husband's hand aborted her, robbing her of the joy of motherhood. It was later that she found out that while she was out, the doctors had given her a clean bill of health. I'm sorry, she's not you, you know. It was a little early. And how would you bear a pregnancy now? How would you raise a child? The girl herself did not know how she could just survive, bear, give birth, just to take care of the baby. What to say to all this? Maybe it's true that everything turned out that way then. After all, if Peter was raising his hand on her, then surely the baby would suffer as well. She just nodded her head and, turning the stroller, drove out of the chief physician's office. Her colleagues supported her, some with money, some with food, some just dropped by for a 5-minute chat. But Tony, it's not the same communication. It's not the same life I used to have. It's all that to me. Don't tell me you're sick of it and you're gonna go headfirst. But at the very least, off a bridge and into a river. What about me? You'll leave me to my fate, to the mercy of my accountants. Her friend could always cheer her up, if only for a moment, but it would make her smile. Although it was just Tony, whom Julia did not perceive as a man, as a lover and husband, although she realized he would be faithful not only as a friend, but also as a loving husband, a wonderful father, and even an excellent lover. Why did she think so? I myself did not understand. I'd never even slept with him once in my life. Life had given them only one kiss, but that was it. A friend, nothing more. Tony, I don't know how I'm supposed to go on. Just sitting in my mom's 3-bedroom apartment like this. Going from room to room in a stroller, looking out the window and enjoying the sunshine. I'm just going crazy. And it's only summer. What happens when fall and winter come? I'll go crazy. Julia, I take it you don't want to come to me. Then I'll give you another idea. My grandmother left me a house in the country. True, it's not an apartment with Euro renovation, but the structure itself is good. There's a stove. And by the way, it'll be great for your spine and legs. Then there's water. By the way, it's brought into the kitchen, though it's cold. Then there's a small vegetable garden, but a huge garden. And Tony smiled at his memory of spending all his summers at his grandmother's house. Those were the best days of his life. He would run with his friends to the river, fish at the local lake. Pears apples in the garden were his breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And how good was sleep in the hayloft? And how good was the bread from the oven? Tony, I'm not much of a villager. Me and the village. Who will bring me firewood? Who will bring me groceries? I don't know. Maybe I'll get sick. And then what? Well, you're a doctor yourself. And by the way, there's a neighboring village in need of a therapist. You know, in villages, doctors are a luxury. Will you be needed there? You'll be welcomed with open arms. The chairman has a car. He'll drive you around if necessary, and he'll buy food and bring it himself. I don't even know, though I'm sick of sitting around. I've been at home for the 2nd year without any progress. And Julia shrugged her shoulders, tormented by doubts. I'm tired of sitting at home, but to go to the village as a doctor. Will she be able to cope? Who will help her? If anything, where? Who would want to take an invalid? Tell me, how does your disability affect your ability as a brilliant therapist? It doesn't. Patients come in, they tell you everything. You listen to their blood pressure, send them for tests, and then diagnose them. You're a brilliant diagnostician. To you, people sign up for 6 months in advance. The girl tilted her head with a smile. Yes, it was so long ago that she couldn't even remember. And Tony put his hand on her palm, resting on the warm shoulders that were wrapped around her legs, and looked into her eyes. Let's make a deal like this while it's fall-winter and still March. I think you'll stay at home, replenish your knowledge of medicine. What and how? But in April, I'll take you to the village, show you the house. Then I'll introduce you to the head of the local village council and show you the outpatient clinic. And then it's up to you. What do you want to do? I agree. Julia nodded and mentally imagined herself a village doctor. On the one hand, what does she have to lose? And so the job is a change of scenery, a salary after all. And the small disability pension she receives is not enough. And the girl nodded her head. It was good that at least she had him, or without Tony she would be completely lost. She didn't know what to do. Tony, I agree, but I don't think it will work out. That's a good idea. I'm handicapped. No. And the girl is a wonderful person and a professional. And just because you're in a chair, it doesn't mean anything to me. Tony, don't be ridiculous. You're a young, handsome guy, but why do you need me and what are you going to do? I won't give you an heir. I'll be a burden. Even though you're my friend, I won't be a burden to you. All right, I'll put it another way. If you were walking, you'd be with me, you'd leave Peter. If I walked, I'd leave him. I'd be naked. And then Julia cried. After all, about the fact that she lost a child and in the future, most likely, will not be able to have children. She hadn't told anyone. And now the memories came flooding out. There was no way she could stop the tears. A friend, don't shed tears for one fool. He's not worth it. I'm not talking about Peterloo tears. Tony, you know I haven't told anyone. You see, I can't have kids. Well, not like that. When Peter hit me and I fell, I had a miscarriage. But it was so small, I didn't know I was pregnant. The doctors cleaned it up, of course, but I'm just not sure I can get pregnant. You don't know, or that's what the doctors told you based on the test results. Toll, I'm an excellent diagnostician who can even diagnose himself. And I understand that even if you conceive, how to carry the baby. And who'd want to take a handicapped person? Only a pervert, probably. Julia, you must have really hit your head that hard then, on all your brains. I like you. Don't you realize that? And I want to be with you. Even if you spend the rest of your life spinning the wheels of that wheelchair, I'll carry you in my arms. You can't conceive. Let's do the echo. It won't help the adoption. It'll just be with me. The words sounded so convincing that the girl looked at her old friend for the first time. On the other side, as a man. She, wiping the tears from her face, took a tissue and blotted it again with water under the tap face. Tony, are you really serious about this? Is there any other way, or do you know me? It wasn't the first day, but she closed her eyes and rested her head on the back of the stroller, touching her head to the cold tile. It helped her to collect her thoughts, to focus, to realize from scratch to herself what she really cared about, what her exhausted body and soul wanted. Tony, I am grateful for your help and all that you have done and are doing. But let's not rush things. I need to figure things out on my own. She opened her eyes and looked at the guy who sat across from her and smiled his charming smile. Julia instinctively reached out to him and pinched both cheeks, but just like a small child. Yes, in fact, he was a little boy to her. Even though he was only a week younger than her, that's fine. Now let's get dressed and go for a walk. It's a beautiful September. We shouldn't miss what nature has to offer. It was a beautiful fall day, which Julia remembered for a long time. Because today she was reborn anew, looked at Tony in a new way, realized that she was still alive and that she could be, even if not as a mother, but as a wife and a friend and a specialist. It was not without reason that she had studied for almost 6 years, and she had a lot of practice. A lot of people talk about her as a great professional. "Tony, you know what I was thinking," the girl said when the guy brought her home. "I guess I'll go into my old job this week and ask for a practice to restore my knowledge. I'll wash ducks and take test tubes if I have to. You don't need legs for that kind of work, but hands. You see, you're starting to think soberly, and everything will come to your senses. As for Peter, my advice to you is to sue him. No, you know what happened last year. The statute of limitations expired. That's what my chief of staff told me at work. Although, like you advised me to sue my husband. But I'll be honest, Peter was helping me out with money at the time. Yeah, and he crippled you. Okay, Julia, it's up to you. You're a smart girl." Yes, I am, Julia thought. When she washed in life under a stream of warm water, in the converted shower she went to sleep. If she was smart, she would definitely not allow that he raises his hand on her. Although what's done is done, you have to live with it, dearie. She didn't let Anya go. She's a wreck on the beach. And you're all at my wedding. The girl lay on the bed and thought maybe and really divorce Peter to live in the village, develop legs, and maybe even get pregnant. With whom? Anyone, even my old friend. There aren't many men around. I'm still young and attractive, and I'll get on my feet. So with these thoughts, she closed her eyes and instantly blacked out. She fell into a deep sleep without noticing. That night, she was running along the same beach again. Like back in first grade, when she was given a trip to the sea from the school. How blissful was that? To run on the sand like that, her feet, and we were languidly on the warm sea. And all around was sun, wind, and freedom. The girl didn't notice how she woke up crying. Her pillow was wet, and the clock showed only 3 o'clock. Julia rose on her arms and looked out the window. The moon was accurately illuminating her bed, and in its rays the fall leaves were twirling. It was like a waltz when 1, 2, 3 and twirled in a magnificent dance to the brilliant melody of Bach or Schubert. She adored music and more than once put at home records Soviet old turntable devalued around the room. But it annoyed Peter, although the girl herself did not understand why. Why does it annoy you? It's a classic. That's what annoys the classics. And I'm not all of them. I will never be like the common herd of sheep. I'm unique and special. And one day, in a fit of rage, he smashed her old record player, stomped on the records with his feet. And she stood there and watched and couldn't do anything. She didn't understand why. She just stood there and watched her hobbies being trampled on. And now she understood it was a kind of dependence on her husband, a manifestation of love, a sacrifice to her executioner. And Derry got something. Probably a new blank sheet of paper from which to write her future. And she lay down again, just turning the pillow wet side down. So what if it was wet? Tears are water, and water has a way of drying up and evaporating. And you, Peter, are definitely out of my life. Enough. Julia moved to a small village in the middle of April and did not regret it for a minute. Yes, it turned out to be quite a picturesque place, just as Tony had promised. A small house, but quite sturdy and cozy with 2 rooms and a hall, kitchen, and entrance hall. A large garden behind it, and around it endless fields covered with the first green grass. After the urban metropolis, it seemed like some other unreal world. Well, you're a lucky girl. Spring is early and warm this year, even without rain. By the way, here are the keys to the gate of the house. Keep and possess. And be your rightful owner. If I was on my feet. But I'm not much of a hostess, am I? There's a huge garden. And a vegetable garden. They need care and supervision. What can I do? You can keep your spirits up and at least look after it. Pick the fruit. And nature is like that. You know, smart aunt, look and the tree will give birth. Julia smiled at her friend and put her face under the warm spring breeze and the first real rays of sunshine. How nice is it here? It's not her apartment, where she was locked up like in a prison and didn't want to see anything or anyone. Now she could have a cat in the house. Maybe even some chickens. What's in there? She can feed them. And then there's the truth. What kind of household would have more rabbits? Can she buy milk from the neighbors? Tony, you know, I want to have chickens here, even a cat. And then you can help me with that. No problem. Come on, I'll introduce you to the head of the village council first. He, by the way, I saw in the car, came to the local medical center. And there on the spot we will organize and chickens, and firewood, and help around the house. The house is fine, but the yard should be cleaned up. Everything is overgrown. There the bushes grew wildly. Let's go. That's all later. Already on the spot at the local medical center I saw her. I noted that everything here is done quite well and clean to the best of my ability, and the equipment is not new, but working. The medicines are stacked properly, right? You can feel the hand of the manager, which pleased her immensely. So we'll work together, she thought. Tony, hi. What brings you here? The voice of a short, stocky man distracted the girl from her inner musings. Andrew, I brought you a general practitioner. If you take Julia under your care and protection, Andrew, the local council leader, will help you with everything. Good afternoon. The lovely Julia. I'm delighted to meet you and also delighted that we'll have our own therapist. Because you know how poorly we have it in this area. It's horrible. 2 nurses and a driver. That's the whole staff. How do you manage? Julia, I was genuinely surprised at the way the work is done here and how people manage without proper training. Beautiful Julia, I'm ready to carry you in my arms. Just stay with us. You're our salvation and our help. You're already settled in, by the way. Andrew naively thought she had already agreed. But how can you work in such a mode and with such a set? Julia just didn't understand and already inwardly doubted whether she should stay here. But she was not used to giving up, so she smiled at the head of the village council and simply said, Yes, Tony has taken me in his house, but I really need your help to organize the yard. It's overgrown. I need wood to clean the stove, and so to speak, my personal request, if you can, chickens and a ginger kitten. No problem, Julia. By lunchtime, you will have a man with mow the grass, clean the yard, then tomorrow we'll take care of firewood and stove, and they're smoothly moved to the garden. You have firewood for the first couple days? Yes, thank you. But we'll organize the chickens. We can ask around the neighbors. Didn't any of them grow up dry? My man will see the condition of the hen house, bring you some food, and we'll think about kittens. By the way, you would also meet a small dog in the yard or in the house to run and bark like a bell. Julia smiled. It's true. Well, how in the village without a dog? No way. She already imagined how from the morning she would feed the hens, give porridge with dog's meat, how she would pet the cat and go to the garden to drink her morning coffee. No, her Julia shook her head and mentally already stayed here. After all, how stupid was she to have stayed in the city for so long? She should go to the air, to nature, develop her legs, and forget about Peter could already walk on her own 2 feet. I'm sorry, she's not up for anything you said. Andrew tilted his head closer so he could hear her better. No, I'm sorry, Andrew, it's nothing. Just thinking out loud. It's okay if I call you by your first name. I'd be happy for you to call me by my first name. That's so wonderful to hear. Andrew, from a girl like you. Come on, I'm not a girl anymore, and a wheelchair doesn't make me look good. You know, I've always been a sensible man. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The main thing is the mind, and the body is harmful. Excuse me, but how come Andrew shouldn't ask now? You'd better help the girl to get settled, and then you'll ask questions over a cup of tea. Tony made it clear to his head that the topic was delicate enough that he shouldn't be so gung-ho about the new therapist. Julia, I apologize if my question offended you. But you understand, we have a priest in the neighboring village, So he's talking about the beginning. Andrew, sorry, let's not talk about your mysticism. And all of a sudden, Tony tilted his head up to the sky and rolled his eyes. He had heard this story about the local priest from the head of his village more than once. They say he has the gift of healing, cures cancer, exorcises demons, and so on. People even come to him in droves, coming from cities and almost from neighboring countries. And here he is right next door. Just take it. Tony, that's where you're wrong. He gets people back on their feet, by the way. You should go to the temple. Oh, sorry, when you're settled in, I'll take you there. It's a beautiful place. Even artists come from the capital to sketch there. So you won't regret it. And communion with God, thank you. But probably a little later. And I can't say that I'm a particularly religious person. Doctors and priests are like two opposing camps, each with their own truth. Yeah, it's like Spartacus and Dynamo fans. I agree with you, dear girl, but still we come to it. But that's for later. Now let's go to my office. I'll feed you lunch and we'll talk about it. What do you want in the house and what do you want in your dispensary? It was near evening in the flooded house when Julia and Tony sat at the table and had dinner. We discussed working points, what was needed, how much, how to organize the work. It was like that. Tony, it's all so cool. I haven't felt this good since I entered the Institute and met Peter. But she immediately faltered when she read the grimace of displeasure and misunderstanding on Tony's face. Yes, Isabella, the way he used to raise his hands at you. And he probably wanted to say that it was probably his fault she was in a wheelchair now. But he didn't. He felt sorry for hurting and so exhausted both soul and body. So he just got up and walked out of the room into the yard. It was so desirable to smoke. But the guy gave up this habit about 3 years ago, although a pack of cigarettes in his bag or in his car was always there. He went back to the car and rummaged through the glove compartment, pulled out cigarettes and took them out. One he lit. A few minutes later, he heard the squeak of wheels. That's right. Julia pulled into the street to see where he was. Tony, I'm sorry. I understand that mentioning Peter annoys you, but let's not make a big deal out of it. I'm trying to get over him, but so far I'm not doing a very good job. Yeah, I know, but I hate to see you like this. Then don't look. Then why did you bring me here to get out of my sight? She swung the baby carriage around angrily and, misjudging her strength and the country roads, tipped over, falling sideways. Tony did not have time to pick her up, and Julia fell to the ground with a thud and flew out of the stroller, crying like a little girl from resentment and pain. No pain at all. More like resentment that Tony had said that to her. He knew how she reacted to every remark he made. It was one thing for a stranger to say it. It's another thing if it's said by a friend who knows everything and anything. Julia, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I'm sorry. Darling, you're my man. Tony, how can I forgive you when she was choking with anger and tears? If you blame me for my disability, how do you work with people after that? How do you get them back on their feet? Well, I'll tell you straight up that you're in the way now. Your own professionalism, work with disabilities, or you or me to tell you how many great doctors, being almost at death's door, put others on their feet. And this village needs your bright head. There are 2 assistants plus a driver with a car. She looked up at him from below and could not hold back the tears that rolled down her cheeks. Toto neatly put the stroller, also neatly put the girl in it, and without saying a word, just drove her friend into the house. Already there he transferred her to a bench near the stove and began to take off his sneakers, then dirty and muddy pants, sweater, despite Julia's fierce resistance. So don't even think about resisting. I'll bring you, by the way, the other day, washed and connected. There's water in the house, so you won't have to do it by hand. Nothing fell off the stroller, but the crown won't. Julia, but really, I'm sorry about what I said. It won't happen again. Let me put you on the stove to warm up and try to sleep. I'll stay with you for a couple of days while you get organized. What about your work? She looked at her friend in surprise. She knew how important it was to him. I just took a week at my own expense. I'll take another if I have to. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. It's important for me to get you settled in here and be comfortable. That you have everything you need. You've got firewood and food for at least a couple weeks. You got a cat and a dog and chickens. What else do you want? Then my boss knows exactly where I am and who I'm with. And by the way, he says hello and thank you very much. Thanks for what? I didn't remind my boss of Tony, but I just didn't understand what he was thanking her for. Yeah, he brought his wife to you, who couldn't get a diagnosis. And you knew right off the bat that she had cancer. And it's a good thing they detected it in time, punctured her, didn't let her die a horrible death. What's he talking about? Come on, it's my job. By the way, did you know that dogs and cats can detect cancer cells by smell? I've heard of it. I've even read about it. It's like the Americans have adopted this technique in hospitals. Now we're not America. At least we've got this outpatient clinic to deal with. Okay, I know there's a few charitable organizations in town. I'll contact them. I'll get them to drop off some equipment, medical supplies, and bandages. I understand summer's a hot time in the village. Oh yes, you'll have a lot of work to do. This one's got blood pressure, the other one's got early slopes, the third one's got shovel blisters, and so on and so forth. Wait till you see this. The local women from the neighboring villages will start asking you to marry their sons and grandsons. Believe me, that's a separate topic of conversation. Tony, are you really joking? The girl looked at her friend attentively and on her hands, having risen, settled down on the stove. No, believe me, in our villages there are 5 women per 10 men. That's the statistics. And believe me, your legs are not a judgment. If a man loves you, it's in a city where there's only silicone and eyelash extensions. Guys choose their girlfriends on principle. How much money is invested in her? And here in the villages is important natural beauty without embellishments. And believe me, for many your legs will not be an obstacle. Like for you? Did you just realize that now? Tony smiled and gave her a big, and in the rank to cover her legs and stroked her hand. He had loved this girl for a long time, even after she stopped walking. And the disability hadn't turned him away in any way, hadn't broken him for a minute. Only gave him an even greater desire to care for her, not to become her protector. I am your knight, and may it be without end. But at that moment, the front doors in the hay creaked and soft, light footsteps were heard. Tony and Julia looked at each other. They were definitely not expecting anyone today, and now they had an uninvited visitor. Good evening to this house. Neighbor Wendy's voice sounded loud and even resounding throughout the small house. Good evening, Grandma Wendy. How are you? How's your health? Tony was glad to see a neighbor he hadn't seen in 5 years. And by your prayers, Tony, I heard you had a doctor come to see us. That's good. We need doctors. I hear you need a cat for your house. Well, I brought you a kitten from my cat Red. Will you take it? We'll take Wendy. I don't know what your middle name is, I'm sorry. Julia said to her, looking out for matches. So it's you. Good evening again. Just call me Wendy. What's your name? Julia. Just Julia. I'm sorry I'm not meeting you on my feet. It's just my feet on wheels over there in the corner. The grandmother immediately realized that the new medically disabled. But she didn't show her surprise with any words or facial expressions. She was a wise woman who had delivered babies, but now she was no longer in good health, although she still had her wit and experience. It's all right, Julia, I understand you're Polish by nationality. Not by nationality, but by my father. He's Polish, and my mom is a native of St. Petersburg. So that's how I got my international mix. It's okay. It's good to have 2 nations together. And for your legs. But don't worry, we'll put you on them. Get out of here. You know, we've got a lot of holy places here. And the land is fertile. Build it with your bare feet and you'll feel the power coming from it. Wendy, do you really understand that Julia is a doctor and all that? It's science. And here I am with my superstitions. Here's my superstition. The red cat will be, believe me, a great rat catcher. And the grandmother took out a beautiful red kitten, which she immediately handed to me with joy. The girl almost jumped from the stove on her own 2 feet. After all, she had dreamed of such a miracle for a long time. And here it was, brought straight home. The cat looked at her carefully and flashed, started quietly muttering Julia under a warm hand stroked, lice it on the head. What a big kitten. Can you feel the breed? I've got a cat. What do you want? My son brought her to me. He says she's a purebred Siberian cat. Mirka's alive, but my son's long gone. That's the legacy of my boy, and the old woman turned away. I quietly wiped away a tear, reflected on life, and Tony and Julia just fell silent for a moment. Wendy, do you happen to have any extra chickens for the household? We need to teach the metropolis the joys of rural life. Yes, please, even 10, I'll pay you the money. The girl was glad that her neighbor could help her so easily. Although, Tony, I don't have a chicken coop yet, and I don't have any feed. I do have chickens. I'll be able to give them to you in 2 weeks. They're still small. Let them grow up. My chickens are great dryers. So you'll always have homemade crates. Can you order feed from our head? He buys for the whole village. Thank you. Why did you have your blood pressure taken? Or do you have any complaints? Julia's professional sense has kicked in. My girl, I came to you not as a patient, but as a neighbor. But I'll come to the reception, but only as soon as you get settled both at home and in your hospital. Then I'll complain. But for now, she put milk, bread, and homemade on the table for you. The old woman put a bag on the table and began to take out food from it. By the way, Tony, give me a small plate for the cat. I'll pour him some milk. Let him get used to his new home. And if the little guy runs away, don't worry. He'll probably run to his mama's house and talk to the young ones for a few more minutes. Grandma went home and Julia and Tony went to bed. What was there to say? The day had been full of events, of emotions, of getting to know each other. But strangely enough, it was in this house on the stove that Julia slept as sweetly as she had never slept. Even at home, she dreamed of the sea. And once again, she was running down the beach on her own feet. Julia, wake up, girl. What's wrong? Tony's voice sounded as if from far away, and the girl didn't immediately realize she was still asleep. Tony, I'm sorry. What happened? The girl's voice sounded sleepy and somewhat annoyed. After all, she was sleeping so sweetly. You were crying in your sleep and moaning. I woke you up, but I'm sorry. I dreamt of the sea and the beach. I was running on the sand. It's a good thing I woke you up. Are you going to lie down again, or are you going to get up? And what time is it? I didn't look at the clock and was surprised. It was almost 12 o'clock. Wow, she's been asleep for almost 12 hours. Oh, I'm so hot. I've never slept that long. This place is really nice. It's easy to sleep. No nightmares. Tony, help me into the stroller. I gotta get up, wash up, feed the cat, and I gotta go to the outpatient clinic. You probably forgot it's Sunday. I fed the cat a long time ago. As far as sleeping on the stove while I'm here, that's fine. But when I'm gone, you'll have to sleep on the bed. Who's gonna carry you back and forth? Only me. Come on, go wash up and have breakfast or lunch. I've got it all ready. Yeah, Peter never fed me breakfast. He waited for me to cook. And if you don't, it's on you, Julia. You get a big slap in the face. And here it's just like that. Breakfast on the table and the cat's fed. And the furnace is fueled. Yeah, Tony, you know how to make a woman feel good. And without straining and without thinking about intimacy with the usual movement of your hands. Julia pulled up his pants, changed his shirt, and then slipped matches, for example, and pulled up a wheelchair, sat down through. First one leg, then the other, and then she drove out into the yard. Isn't it beautiful? It's beautiful. The words from the famous movie came to mind. But what can you do if it was really so? And Julia smiled quietly to herself. The cat immediately jumped into her arms and looked carefully into her face, as if asking what plans her mistress had for today. And there are no plans. It will be necessary, though, to inspect the garden, the henhouse, and everything in the yard. You're with me, kitten, as if understanding her words. Immediately the motivation hinted, jumped from her hands, and with all the vigor rushed into the garden. The garden to see the henhouse. The yard is good, but do you even eat, then? Tony stood on the doorstep and looked at his friend carefully. He regretted that he had asked her to live in the village like that, but it had seemed like a wonderful idea to him at the time, away from her ex-husband. Fresh air, natural products, no gas. But now he was standing there, thinking that he should first put the house in order, think about the car, refrigerator, groceries, and then take the invalid, how she would be here on her own. You know, she doesn't have to. I'll leave you my old cell phone. I'm sorry, I haven't gotten a new one yet. You'll call me every morning and evening. You promise. I bought it myself. I had to get the house cleaned up before I could bring you here. But now I'm here eating fine eyeballs and talking to you. But Tony, don't think about it. Trust me, I'm not that weak. That's a first. Plus there's a job, and there's people, and a car. So who's there to turn to in case of emergency? You know, it's a good thing the job came right out of the blue. In fact, it's a plus for you. In time, maybe then you'll go to the city. It's better to translate than to start from scratch. I said that and only then thought that words could offend my friend. So immediately bit my tongue and simply ducked into the plate. And Julia herself realized that the guy wanted the best. But it turned out as usual. Oh well. I mean, maybe you should be less reactive to words. You gotta get used to it. Girl to the fact that you will not get up. But at the second legs, as if pierced by a charge of current, and Julia, from surprise, shrieked and dropped the fork. What happened? Tony stood up from his seat in surprise. Nothing. It was just something that pricked Julia's heart. She didn't want to say that her legs were electrocuted. Don't entertain the hope that they might regain their sensitivity. That's the connection I had to the temple. Well, the one the head of the collective farm mentioned yesterday. In principle, it's possible. But let's do it next weekend. Just this morning, a man from the village council came to see the hen house. He said it was good, only that it needs some repairs and left to get some materials. So we should be here by 2 o'clock or so. So we go to the temple or wait for the master to repair the hen house. But of course, the master is more important. And my future ones don't need a decent house. So they had breakfast, though it was more like lunch. They chatted merrily. And the girl more and more caught herself thinking that here she would settle down. And this place would bring her a lot of happiness, although she did not realize that here she could meet not only her happiness, but also revelations. The days flew like minutes of the week, like hours. Tony returned to town, promising to come back on weekends, and she stayed on her own. But why on her own, she said to herself as she escorted Tony over the threshold. There's the cat, and then there will be more hens. Now I'll have to get used to living in the village. Soon there will be hens. Really, Carrot the cat flashed and lost his head, and her chin. Yeah, here comes reality. But it's time to get started on the house. And there maybe she'll really get up and start walking Carrot Top. Why don't I go see a priest? Well, if it doesn't help you get back on your feet, then at least you'll confess. The cat trustingly knocked, as if agreeing, and began to rub her face, mewing in her ear his song. What a marvelous animal. Yes, and what a wonderful song. And anyway, why was she so opposed to coming here? I guess it's the fear of change that stops a lot of people. Though now she realized it was all for her own good. Rural life and everyday life spun the girl, and the work carried her away. So Julia sometimes forgot that she was in a wheelchair. What's to say? The talent of an excellent therapist and experienced doctor make her famous. To the new doctor lined up lines of sufferers. Julia, you're our star. The head of the village council once told her. By the way, read about you in the newspaper. And he handed her a newspaper bought in a neighboring district. And indeed, on the first page, there was a note that the new doctor of the village of such and such puts not only people on their feet, but is considered a great diagnosis. And the reason for this is one case in the village. A trivial case. But probably it is from such situations that local legends and stories are born. In one resident of a neighboring village, a girl first grader fell ill. For a long time, they could not establish an accurate diagnosis. The little girl was bothered by a woody cough. Everyone thought a cold, but it turned out to be a heart problem. And it's good that the diagnosis could be made in time, when the problem can be solved with medication and did not have to resort to surgery. There are many such situations, and there will be more. Julia thought. After all, she loved these places and these hard-working, kind people. Andrew, could you do me a favor? One day, Julia asked the head of the village council. Yes, my dear, beautiful visitor. Lord of my rheumatism, tamer pressure all I can. Could you take me to that temple you spoke of, where Father John rules? Is it true that he has some kind of power? Julia, and you tell me this. Are you a doctor? No, I'm sorry, he may have powers. What kind of power? But I've never heard anything about it. You really believe that? I'm sorry for asking. You know, your grandmothers and neighboring villagers have been telling me all about him. Believe it or not, maybe we should go. It's a good thing. Let's go. We'll be at the service this Sunday. See our beauty. And communion with God, you know. I don't know, but maybe he'll help me so I can walk again. Do you think I'll be your eighth wonder of the world? The priest laid his hands on her and she got up and walked. Julia herself did not realize at that moment why she had spoken so disparagingly about the priest, about faith and God. Her mother and grandmother of the youngest had accustomed the girl to faith, but apparently the Soviet authorities and her studies at medical school had nullified all faith in miracles. Andrew stood next to her, looked at her intently and asked Julia, "How did it happen that you are in a wheelchair?" "You won't believe it, but my husband beat me. I fell, hit myself and lost not only my legs, but also my unborn child. I apologize if I hurt your feelings as a believer, but when a husband beats his wife, somehow my faith in God and higher powers fades to nothing. I do. You know, in our temple, Father John was disabled himself. Yeah, well, don't look at me so skeptical. Just like you had problems with your legs. From what I hear, he didn't ride in a wheelchair, but when he took it, it went away. But if you don't believe me, I won't bother you with these stories, but I'll take you. And I should go to the service myself. I've got things to do." And the head of the village council left her outpatient clinic. But on the threshold, he stopped and turned around and asked, "Did you and your husband get married?" Julia did not say anything. She just nodded her head negatively, and the man didn't say anything, but just lowered his head and went about his business. Yes, life is such an unpredictable thing that the greatest sorrow and the greatest happiness can happen to anyone. But already on Sunday at 9 o'clock, Andrew's car was parked near her house, and he, with a smile on his face in a new suit, knocked on the door of her Julia. "It's Andrew, open up. Taking you to the temple today, Andrew. Come in. I'll make tea and come out to you. You can stay in the kitchen. I've made pancakes. We'll have breakfast, if you don't mind." "I don't mind. But to tell you the truth, I ate a lot this morning, and we still have to drive 30 minutes on our roads. So if you don't want to be late for the most solemn part of the service, let's go well. I, in principle, also ate in the morning, so, as they say, load me into your carriage and let's go. My car hasn't been bought yet. It's probably waiting somewhere in the showroom, but with a salary like this, I won't see it soon." She was trying to make a joke, but it didn't work. "Julia, if you need transportation, don't hesitate to speak up. I can just forget to offer you my carriage, as you said. Because if you need to go to the city or something, just a whistle. Thank you, I'll say. I don't know how to whistle, to be honest." So they drove to the neighboring village. They joked and laughed merrily. Andrew understood perfectly well that he was carrying a fragile girl, plus an invalid, so he tried to drive slower so as not to shake on the local roads. Julia understood this and mentally thanked him, thinking that her ex-husband would probably have driven like a daredevil, not caring about her needs. As they entered the neighboring village, Andrew steered the car steadily along the southern road. In a couple of minutes, they were standing near a wooden church. What kind of church is it, though? A real work of art. It was a rather large church, made of a solid log cabin with high domes and gilded crosses. It is really beautiful, as birch trees grow around. By the lake, you can see the forest not far away, and all around are greenery, blue sky, and curious people's eyes. Julia, don't pay attention to people. Everyone may be staring at you right now. That's why I warn you at once not to take slanted glances to heart. The main thing is not to touch them with your hands. I'm used to everything else. Then let me help you into the stroller, grab my neck." Julia put her arms around Andrew's neck and mentally noted to herself, "He smells good. And how strong are his arms. You're a fool. In a wheelchair, you're looking at a man. But why not?" She looked up and their eyes met. They met. How blue are his eyes? That's just creepy. Andrew, how blue are your eyes? Like the sky, but you didn't come here to see my eyes. And people are already looking at us funny, even though you said to ignore them, or did you? Julia grinned playfully and looked at the man. He was old enough to be her older brother or even her father. But right now she looked at him like a woman who had long ago forgotten how to flirt, but remembered that she could be beautiful and desirable. A merry gaggle of cats, and the one for whom one rolls down mountains, performs feats, and all that. But really, as she looked around at the people standing around the temple, she noticed the people squinting at them. She clenched her fists, driving her nails under the elbow of her wheelchair, and raised her head high. Andrew, it's a good thing you can carry me in this wheelchair, or I probably wouldn't have made it. Or at least turn around and drive away. Well, if you could handle it, you could handle it. But as for leaving, yeah. But I want to show you our pride, this temple from the inside, and introduce you to Father John. He's your age, by the way. And if I'm not mistaken, this man used to be in the military. Now he's ruling. Before she could finish, a priest came around the corner and waved. Andrew waved back. There's our spiritual father. Good afternoon, Andrew. Good afternoon. And to you, Julia. It's good to see you in my temple. How do you know my name? Although, pardon me, that's probably a silly question for a priest. It's not stupid at all, but I'll tell you right away. It's not mystical. It's just that I've heard a lot about you. I was thinking of coming to see you myself. Julia wanted to make a joke, but then he didn't. It's not appropriate to joke about such things with a priest. No, just to get acquainted. After all, medicine and religion should go together. Don't you think so? I suppose so. But I'm sorry, Father, I was brought up in the era of developed socialism. That's why you're not friendly with religion. But still, I came here. I've been told a lot about you. Probably that I have some kind of healing gift, the priest replied. But that's more your paraphilia. By the way, and about you are legends among my parishioners. You accurately diagnose, so it's kind of similar. But that's not what we're talking about. Come on in. The service is about to begin, and the priest gestured both of them into the temple. When Julia drove carefully into the wooden church, she was surprised by the beauty she had not seen for a long time, even in large churches. And here in an ordinary village, the icons are painted gold, and the right? Yes, her grandmother was probably right. When priests would walk like Christ with one stick and in one robe, then faith would be strong. But she did not say anything, but just stood on the baby carriages near the entrance and listened to John's sermon. Indeed, this priest had a lot of eloquence. I guess I could immediately see the KGB school, where rhetoric was at the highest level, as well as the ability to persuade. Well, that's probably the reason why there are such legends about this priest. But it's their bread, their job to turn Orthodox and unbelievers alike to Christ, to strengthen the faith and whatever it takes. What do you think of my sermon? Father John came up to Nina after the service and looked at her carefully. You know, it was impressive. I think even the most unbelievers would definitely become your parishioners. But I don't know if I'd be one of them. But faith is a thing. You know, you have to come to it. So no one's gonna force it on you, although I'd love to have you among my friends at least. I'm glad, and frankly, I'd love to accept your offer of friendship. You might actually. Come see me in the outpatient clinic. As your blood pressure goes. Maybe I should prescribe you some vitamins. You have kids. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a silly question. You're a priest. It's all right, don't worry. But I'll definitely come back tomorrow if you don't mind. Julia nodded her head and only wanted to turn around and go to Andrew's car as her gaze fell on a man. Strange, she noted to herself. A painfully familiar back and gait in general. But she shook her head and drove on to the car of the head of the village council, justifying this similarity. And what can he do? My Peter is mine. She still considered him hers, though she had long ago tried to forget him. They had parted under not the best of circumstances, and Julia still wore the ring. And she can't even get to the registry office to file for divorce. Is it worth getting a divorce? Maybe everything can go on as it is. She grinned wickedly and let him chase me if he thinks of getting married a second time. I don't think he'll ever get a divorce. Never. Julia, I hope you didn't wait long for me. Did Andrew's voice bring her out of her own angry musings? No, it's okay. I'll at least get out of my little world called home. Work is great. How's the service, by the way? Hope you're not disappointed with your time. No, Andrew, if you don't mind coming down here, you should definitely take me with you. I really like it here. It's beautiful. You can really come here for sketches. A lot of people come here. Imagine, by the way, some of the paintings depict me. Just like our priest. Andrew, have you ever had it in this place that you look at a person from the back, and it seems to you that you have already seen him somewhere? I mean, it could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be here and now. And that you've met someone you know. Julia did not say that she had seen her husband's back, but just kept silent. She didn't pursue the topic herself, but the unpleasant residue remained. Though business and care of the house and the outpatient clinic made her forget about it. Although soon the girl again experienced a lot of unpleasant moments. And the reason for this was the fall holiday, which in the village it was customary to celebrate at the very beginning in the temple. Who does not know this holiday, when in the temple are carried to sanctify apples, honey, and nuts, which are loved by many? Julia, let's go to the temple. We should consecrate these first apples from your garden. You've done well, by the way. You've trimmed the trees, removed the old bushes and branches. Kudos and honor to you. But Andrew, it's not without your help. Julia once again caught herself thinking that Andrew liked her more and more, although the man himself was polite and all. He didn't try to pester her or somehow show his own desire, only the maximum of politeness, attention, and help. Though in fact, for that she was already grateful to him. After all, few people cared about her. Tony didn't count in this case. Yes, I take a little credit for that too. But it's still your labor, which is worth appreciating. And the cat has grown hens everywhere in the yard, and in the house you can feel the hand of the mistress. It's true that the house and the garden were cleaned. Everywhere you could feel the attention and care in all this. Julia put not a part of herself, but all of herself, and nature gave her much more gratitude in return. They drove to the temple and sweetly chatted about everything. And the girl did not even suspect what could happen to her that day, when Andrew helped her to get out of the car and get on the stroller. Julia turned it around with the usual movement of her hands and drove to the temple. Not waiting for her counselor, she knew full well that Andrew would not enter until he put the car in the church. In fact, he tried to drive as close to the entrance as possible to make it easier for his companion to get in. When Julia drove into the church, she looked for Father John with her eyes. The service had not yet begun, and it was possible to talk to him a little, as was usual before every service. But when she heard his familiar voice and turned around, and she almost fell off the stroller, Julia just couldn't believe her eyes. Standing next to the priest was her husband, and he was crying. He was really crying. Julia could see large tears rolling down his face, and his hands were trembling folded in the area of his chest. She sat in the stroller and could not believe her eyes. Her husband was here in the temple crying. There was no way that could have happened. Peter had never attended church, especially during their entire time together. He didn't cry. She hadn't seen a single tear on his face. Even when his mother had died, he'd been stingy with tears at the funeral, as well as any emotion. But could it be her hallucinations? A trick of the eye? Yes, it couldn't be. She remembered this man better than anyone else. And it hadn't been long enough since they parted to forget his profile, that favorite leather jacket of his. Come up and say hello. Why not? After all, she didn't really owe him anything. He's the one who got her into this state. Peter, is that you? Julia's words sounded to the man out of the blue and like a judgment on Julia. Is it really you? Have I changed so much that you don't recognize me? Or have I aged? Although the stroller does not add beauty, but I think you can recognize my face. What brings you here? I hope it's not to follow me. No, I'm sorry. I'm here to see my Father John on a personal matter. 8. My husband has a personal matter that has nothing to do with taking care of his invalid wife. Julia, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you're in a wheelchair like this. But I'm here about something else. What is it? Julia didn't understand why she was interested in the private life of her husband, who had made her an invalid, but she couldn't stop herself. She didn't care about his problems. But most likely, it was a woman's curiosity that prevailed in this case. But her husband, strangely enough, did not react harshly to her harsh statement and just looked at her pitifully and walked away. Wow, thought Julia, what had happened to her husband? Previously, he would have simply torn her apart for such words. But now the girl did not know how to react. She didn't expect herself to be so brave. But turning around, she saw behind the back of Andrew Rural Head, who stood and with a hard expression, looked at all this. His gaze was the same as her ex-husband's. But, Andrew, you have heard everything, but I can introduce you in absentia. This is my ex-husband, or rather, still husband. We're just not divorced. And he's the reason I'm sitting here in a wheelchair right now. The man smiled and squatted down in front of Nina. He took her hands in his and kissed them, not realizing what he was doing. And then said quietly, you know, if he had said something bad to you, I would have killed him for sure. Here's a cross for you. And he crossed himself, and then he kissed her hands again. Andrew's treatment of her simply shocked her into a state of mild shock, and she blushed, like a freshman getting her first taste of light wine and kissing a guy. Like a grown woman, and so blushed with shame, Julia thought and simply tried to take her hands from Andrew's strong palms. You don't have to take your hands away. I didn't hurt you. By the way, John's father told me that you can, in fact, be put back on your feet. I wonder how. She wanted to be sarcastic, like, is this place prayed for? Or is there a special prayer? But she didn't. She didn't want to spoil such a beautiful moment. And by the way, she didn't care that people were standing around and looking at this couple as if they were mesmerized. The head of the village council and the invalid. No, he has a masseur he knows. He's a practicing guru or something, but he's the one who got him back on his feet after the tragedy. That's how I remember it. You said he was in the missile force somewhere, and not in the missile force, but in security, guarding a secret facility in a space town. Well, I guess it's not that simple. By the way, he promised to give me his phone number, but he said that he would contact him first to clarify whether he accepts patients or not. Where is he now? Do you think I have any chance of walking on my own legs? I think it's worth using any method, and as a medical man, you should know that. Now let's go into town. I know a great taco place, and they have a real Mexican chef. At the mention of food, Julia realized how hungry she was, and her stomach was charging so treacherously that the sound must have been heard by everyone around her. Yep, looking around. She looked at the people and saw that everyone was looking at her like she was a free circus. So be it. Andrew is a fine man and a fine man. Surely he's the one every woman from small to large is pining for. She proudly raised her head and turned the stroller and went to the car. Look, I'm not so helpless. Yes, the afternoon and evening had been charming. Great company and delicious tacos, a cozy cafe and Andrew nearby. But the minutes flew by like crazy. And only in the evening Julia remembered that she had to work tomorrow, and she looked at her watch and shrieked quietly, "Oh, I have to work tomorrow, and it's so late. And the cat's home fed. And the chickens are affected by the costs of city life, when you are not responsible for anyone but yourself. Don't worry about it. I called your neighbor's grandmother, and she's been feeding everyone. I've got a car, and I'll take you home. How are you enjoying your evening, by the way? Andrew, you don't know how good I feel. I had a wonderful evening here." That's good. So you were able to forget about your husband, erase him from your memory. And that was the truth. She didn't even think about Peter for a minute. And Tony had kind of faded into the background. And the strangest thing was that she enjoyed Andrew's company. And the man himself seemed to enjoy her company. Andrew, please tell me if you like me. That's when I just sit like this and my mangled legs and the wheelchair are not visible. Warmed by wine and the attention of a handsome man, Julia didn't know why she asked that. Maybe she wanted more attention? Maybe to believe that she was attractive as before. You know, Julia, you are a very beautiful young woman, and I will try to put you on your feet if you will let me, and then it's up to you to decide how we're going to proceed. She nodded her head and looked down at him, thinking how not only was he nice, but also sensible. He didn't say he'd be with her forever. He didn't swear to be faithful to her love like Tony had. He just gave her a choice, but he said he liked her openly, which she couldn't help but be pleased about. And it was at that moment that she realized her past was behind her, gone with her head. Like her Peter did today. Andrew, thank you so much. You know, your words are like a prayer to me. And I just want to do whatever it takes to get my legs walking again. And you're right, then we'll see what we can do. What do you mean? That's it for now. Let's go home. He said it so warmly. It made her want to go home with him. But so far it was just her fantasies and daydreams. Though why dreams? She'd have to get back on her feet. And then maybe she'd ride in Andrew's car and look out the window at the trees and the houses of the field flying by. And it would be quiet and peaceful, as it had never been, not even with Tony, who she knew was wholeheartedly in love with her. And how right he'd been when he'd said that her legs would be no barrier to a man in love who wanted her. What's on your mind? My dear sorceress. And why did Julia smiled and looked at the small man sitting next to her, who was ready to outshine the whole world for her? Well, I don't know, I just wanted to call you that. He turned and looked at her with his sky blue eyes. About what? You know, I just want to keep going, keep going, keep going. No. I should stop at a gas station, have a coffee, eat a hot dog, and then get on the road again. Yes, that's an interesting thought. But I, like you, love the road, especially at night or in the evening. When the sun goes down or it's already set, and you're just driving along not knowing where you're going. I hope you know where we're going now. Yes, I think your Carrot Top is waiting for his mistress. And indeed, the cat was already sitting on the porch looking at her, and the chickens were already sitting on the roost, fed and fed by a kind neighbor. Andrew carried her into the house in his arms, then brought the stroller in, asked if he needed anything, and left. And really, she did not need anything now, but just to be alone with her thoughts, to think about how to live on. And what's next? We have to go to a masseur and work on her legs. You're a medical professional, Julia. You do the thinking. She washed her face and lay down on the bed Tony had made. And just when she closed her eyes, she fell into a dream. It had been a long time since she had slept like this, without dreams, without emotions, and almost until noon Julia simply slept. Although it was Monday, and she always set her alarm clock for 7 o'clock, but that one wasn't new to her, where a knock on the door made her wince, being floored. It's Andrew. I didn't catch you at work, and I can't reach you. You're fine. Andrew, come in. It's not locked. I overslept. I'm fine. I was getting worried. Why didn't you tell me you had the day off, by the way? I wasn't planning on it. I don't know why you decided that. I didn't decide that for you. We were seen at the temple yesterday. Then we went to the restaurant. And when I came to your office, I was told on the spot why we're not together, and why am I asking where Julia is? Wow. So by country standards, we're a couple now. And it turns out we are? But by the way, I don't mind this way of putting it. And I'm pleased that we're almost married. You do know, by the way, that we went to the priest yesterday to arrange the wedding? Even so, Julia really didn't even realize that people thought like that. But the thought itself really pleased her. At that moment, she did not feel her own disability and inferiority. And the very fact that she could be with this handsome man was already inspiring. Yeah, we both know what happened yesterday. But be prepared to be questioned about the details of your future celebration. Thank you for the heads up. But Andrew, I'm interested in another fact. Julia, with a habitual movement of her hand, moved the stroller to herself, threw one leg over, then with her whole body moved into it and threw the other leg over. It was as familiar to her as brushing her teeth or peeling potatoes would be to a normal person. I see you don't need any help. You're doing quite well on your own. Yes, it's a habit and a year of training. But that's not what we're talking about. Andrew, I'm interested in something else, and you can help me figure it out, no problem. Say what you need to say. I saw my husband at the temple yesterday. But why did he come? That's what I need to find out. You can approach John. I'm on good terms with him. Unless it's a secret confession, I suppose. Oh, and just so he's not in doubt. Here's my wedding photo and my passport, which still says we're husband and wife. You can tell in my story that he beat me and now he's here. What's his goal? Maybe he wants to do it again, He wants to hit you. Are you serious? Yeah, the whole village is gonna stand up for you. Andrew, I understand. And that my husband can do anything. He's the kind of man who will stop at nothing. That's one thing. And in terms of my defense, do you have to move in with me or do I have to move in with you? That's great. Let's get your chickens and your cat, get your stuff and go. I have a big house. I don't think Tony would mind. And I feel more comfortable on neutral ground. So if you could just ask John why my husband came here. That's why I came here, by the way. With all this talk, I've forgotten why I came to see you. He told us yesterday that the two of us could come to him. So let's get ready. I'll make you a quick breakfast and get you to the priest. I'm not going yet. Andrew quickly made sandwiches, brewed tea, and invited her to the table. Yeah, look how thoughtful he is. Just like Tony. There's a lot of people to choose from. Are you smiling? That's wonderful. It means you're in a good mood, and your husband's presence around doesn't dampen your mood. Julia, excuse me, why haven't you divorced yet? If you don't want to, you don't have to answer. No, it's simple and trivial. I myself was not eager to file for divorce. And with my legs, I don't have much time to go through the courts. And your husband. But I guess his pride didn't allow him to stoop to the level of having to deal with the issue himself. I'll say this, probably we were both satisfied with this state of affairs. Would you like a divorce? The man's voice sounded calm, but inside him everything was raging. Yes, and understandably, if she does not want to divorce, then, apparently, still loves her husband, and he simply has nothing to do around. And if he does, he has every chance to make her happy. Although, on the other hand, with or without a husband, he will try to make this woman happy. What do you think, Andrew? I think so. Julia nodded her head and ate her sandwich and went outside. She really wanted to divorce her husband, but she was afraid to do it herself. No wonder. After all, Julia knew her husband well, and if he did not like the idea of divorce to be beaten again, and there was no telling what the consequences might be. Andrew left the house, closed the door, and looked carefully at the back of the girl sitting in the wheelchair. Only now he began to understand a little what she had been through. Julia, let me help you sit down later behind the wheelchair and let's go. And you can ask John yourself, by the way. Why did your husband come? She nodded her head and with a familiar movement of her arms around Andrew's neck, who moved her to the front passenger seat. Then he loaded the stroller into the trunk and got behind the wheel. The man had been examining his son for a long time, but was all afraid to show his feelings. Katya, for the last few days, caught her interested look at himself. Of course, it was possible to delicately ask what yes, how. But in the very case intervened the ex-husband of her Julia. Although what ex, if they are still not divorced, and damn him. He came here for a reason, and he went straight to John. John went straight for it. Maybe he really wants Julia back. Have you thought about it? Switching to you. Asked Andrew that your husband Peter wants you back, and therefore went to the priest, but so to speak, with an authority figure to influence you. I thought so. But I know my husband well. He's not used to acting like this. He's rude and mean, even though he has 2 degrees. He was brought up in an intelligent family. But if anything is out of his control, he'll just raise his hand and beat you and that's it. Any constructive conversation is out of the question. That's why I was confused yesterday by his behavior and his reaction to my words. Calm, even humility, and no rudeness. Well, his people were there, witnesses. Maybe that stopped him. Oh no. He beat me up in front of witnesses once. And you can imagine, it was a special treat for him. It was his way of elevating his status, showing he's not beholden to anyone. Yeah, well, if that's the case, his behavior does look suspicious at the very least. I'm surprised you guys made it through the night on your own. All right, we'll go. I'll talk to John. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the courtyard in the priest's gazebo, and John was putting together the table and putting on the samovar. How good of you to come, just like that without a call. You invited us yesterday, so how could you not come? By the way, Father, Julia has a question for you. You see, here's the thing. Yesterday you were approached by her husband, who, in fact, is responsible for the tragic confluence, for the fact that she does not walk. What kind of husband? Tall, swarthy, in a gray leather jacket. He arrived in a white car. You must remember him. He's quite stately and not like the locals. Julia, I have a lot of people coming to see me, so don't take that as praise. But I really might not have remembered him. No, you were just pulling up. And at that moment he turned around and walked towards you. Yeah, that's right. You see, I know him very well. And there's no way he'd just come here. I'm just afraid he's gonna make me do something terrible. I'm afraid to even guess what it is. Let's just say that in the old days, a word he didn't like could get him beaten up. And the result of that beating is sitting in a wheelchair in front of you right now. I understand you, Julia. You're afraid for yourself. But you can sleep well with this man. He did identify himself as Peter. He came here for a different reason. And that reason is not you. Certainly not to divorce you or any other issue. But what then? I saw him crying. And knowing Peter, he's never cried at his own mother's funeral. And here I'm at a loss to guess. You shouldn't. My dear Julia, this is not a secret confession. So I can tell you the reason why he came here, to soothe your soul and dispel all doubts. The priest stood up and went to the window. He must have been thinking about whether to tell or not, but he realized that the woman was right, and it was worth answering her question. After all, she was his wife and a woman who could really have been maimed by this man. I will tell you the reason why this man came here and decide for yourself if he is threatening you or not. Peter came and asked for my help in removing his sin. And I suppose that sin is you, Julia, what he did to you. Why would he say that? Peter thinks all his unborn children are dead because God has turned his back on him. Those words made Julia shudder. So he had other women, and they slept with him pregnant, but apparently couldn't give birth for some trivial reason. Peter was raising his hand at them. She commanded and hooked her fingers into the handrails of her wheelchair. Julia, I suppose. Do you know why his woman can't give birth? And it's not about God or a curse. Peter still raises his hand to them, like he did to me. When I fell and tragedy struck my legs. I was also pregnant, but the due date was so small I didn't realize it. Thank you for sharing your grief with me. I will definitely pray for your soul and hope that the Lord will give you the strength to stand on your feet and feel the joy of motherhood and find a good man. And you tell me, Julia, did you get married to Peter? No, he was against it, and I didn't really insist. And you know, we're both doctors, so to speak, people of scientific mind. And what advice did you give my husband, by the way? Let that be my secret. And how do you feel about going to church? But I hope you'll come to the temple. I'll try, Father. I really like it here. By the way, Andrew told me you know a doctor who got you back on your feet. Oh, by the way, I'm glad you reminded me. That's not true. A doctor like Emmanuel the Masseur. And he really helped me get back on my feet. I called him this morning, by the way, and he's ready to see me in 2 weeks. He's in advanced training right now, so you're going to have to wait a little while. I really didn't know all the specifics of your situation, because he spread his hands as if apologizing for not being able to fully help her. But thank you. And that's the end of my thanks to you, Father John. What matters to me is that you care about me. And there's the truth. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to go. You will. By the way, I'll give you some experience of my own. When it's warm, you take off your shoes in the morning and walk barefoot. Step on the wet grass dew. It has lasting power. Do you have a lush garden, by the way? As I recall, Anatole's mother used to grow various fragrant herbs, so he will be especially grateful to you. Thank you. Father John, I guess we'll be going. The girl looked intently at Andrew, begging him to get out of here as soon as possible. She didn't know why she wanted to leave so badly. Maybe from the overabundance of information, maybe for some other reason. But Andrew understood it and did not delay. He turned down 6 old friends and took her to her car. Julia, what's wrong? You left the priest's house so quickly. Did he hurt you? No, Andrew, it's okay. I got an answer to my question. And he didn't hurt me in any way. John, honestly, I don't know. But it's like someone was pushing me out of this house. Well, I won't bother you with my attention, and you'll forgive me. I have to run an errand. I'll take you home. I'll drop by tonight, if you don't mind. Sure, I don't mind. He looked in this and all the following evenings, trying to become not just the best friend and assistant, but something more in the life of the girl in whom he fell in love at first sight. And he really didn't care that she was disabled, moving around in a wheelchair. The man was ready to carry her in his arms, but only just. Andrew, you were right, Julia once said. And you and I are already talking. Our nurse Nadezhda asked me today, out of the blue, when are we getting married? Wow. But basically, what do you want? Tony's been telling me that I've been visiting too much. I mean, after all, you're a single girl, you live on your own. You should talk to him. You don't have to. I'm really uncomfortable. It's like I complained about you. That's not a man's habit. She smiled quietly. Really? Tony was right to a certain extent. But on the one hand, she was enjoying the visit. Andrew, by the way, before I forget, Father John got through to his friend, the Monopoly therapist, and booked you in for this Sunday. And by the way, we won't have to travel far. The specialist will come to his temple. Can you have him come down here and take a look at you? Maybe he can really get you back on your feet. Do you still believe in miracles? I'm not much of a doctor, but I wouldn't say no to help. I'd like to think you'll need me on my own, not in a wheelchair. Do you really think so? Andrew looked at her carefully. Yes, he smiled. But behind that smile there was sadness. And it was no coincidence that Andrew ran into Julia's husband again in the temple, who had come not by himself, but with his own position. Yes, a man knows how to choose his women. But I guess it's not fate. Andrew did not want to argue with him in the temple, but simply waited until he went outside, and approaching, quietly said, "We need to talk." Peter looked at the strange man in amazement, but did not argue, but simply asked his companion to wait for him in the car, and stepped aside. "Why did you come here to make fun of a single woman again? I know very well that you are her husband and what you did to her. Are you the reason she's in a wheelchair? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I didn't know anything about my ex-wife being here. I came to see John's father because my girlfriend can't carry my baby. Then first of all, why don't you give her a divorce? And secondly, why don't you support her? She refused my money. I'll file for divorce without her. And maybe Father John is right. We all pay for our sins. And what happened to Nina is my sin, which I'm now buying with my kids. Have you tried just talking to your wife and putting things right? You're probably right. I should come and talk to my wife and ask for her forgiveness, and maybe God will grant us both healing." He lowered his head and walked toward the car, but after a few steps he turned around and shouted toward Andrew, "I'll be there in 2 weeks on Sunday. Give this to Nina." And now the man stood in front of Nina, thinking whether or not to tell her about her husband's visit. But perhaps he should tell her, for his visit might be an unpleasant surprise. And he didn't want to get on the young woman's nerves. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. Really, don't get me wrong. What is it you have to say to me? You're not going to ask me to marry you." "Yes, I've seen your husband. I've been talking to him lately. He's coming next weekend with his woman." A shiver ran down the young woman's spine at those words. And for a second she felt as if an electric shock had slipped through her stiff legs. Had sensitivity returned to them? It couldn't be. It's the stuff of science fiction. Are you saying he's coming here? It's for me. What did he say to you? And how dare you talk to him about me at all? Julia, wait, he came to the temple with a girl, and she keeps losing the baby. He asked the priest for advice, repented that he had committed many sins, and this is his punishment. And wait, my dear man, he wants to come and ask your forgiveness for what he has done. He better give you a divorce. That's what I want with all my heart. He'll file for divorce himself. That's what Peter told me. That's what Peter told me. Why do I have to hear it from you? Julia turned to yelling in anger, though she didn't understand why she was yelling at Andrew. In fact, he had always helped her, and now she was choking with anger, but she couldn't help it. After all, her husband is coming here with his new fling, who will look at her and point his finger and say your wife is handicapped. You realize that he will come here with his girlfriend, his mistress, and that one will point her finger at me and say I am handicapped. What am I supposed to do? You don't. He's not coming here to introduce you and her. He's coming here to apologize to you, silly. Do you understand that? He's going to make up for his sins and give you a divorce to make up for his sins. Ha, that's Peter. Yeah, I wouldn't believe it for the life of me. Julia answered her, what if it's true and he gives you a divorce? Ask sincere forgiveness. It'll help, but I don't know what would make you happy. Andrew, I'll tell you more. I forgave him a long time ago, but now I don't want to see him, especially not with his new girlfriend. And you don't have to meet him. I'll be with you and I'll talk to you in person if you give me the go-ahead. If I have to, I'll tell him all the things you want to say and more. Julia herself did not realize what she wanted. For the truth was, she had forgiven her husband long ago. Let him go, threw him out of her life. And now she finds out like this that he has another woman. They want to have a child, but he didn't want to have children with her. Why is that? Julia, why are you angry? You've accomplished a lot. He will come to apologize on his own. He'll give you a divorce. I lost my legs because of him, of my unborn child. Do you understand that? And now I find out that he took a new wife, wants a child with her, and killed mine. Tears were streaming down her face. After all, she remained an invalid without a family and a child. And he will have everything that she did not have and still does not have. How could she live with such a thing? The woman simply did not understand it. She tried to dull her own pain by working, taking care of people, garden, animals, and this house, everything that surrounds her. I beg you, don't cry. Let's make up our minds. So talk to your husband, and I'll be right there with you, so to speak, as your support. Solve all your issues with him, so you can be calm. Do I have to? I just want to get my divorce and forget it all. Forget it like a bad dream. That's the way it's gonna be. But first, you need to not only deal with your own husband, but you need to get checked out. How would you feel about having him check you out here at home, by the way? Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm comfortable here, and I think he's used to working from home. Good. Then I'll make arrangements with him and bring him here. And please don't cry, and everything will be fine. And Andrew put his hands on her lap, patted them lightly, and stood up and walked out of the house. Wow, this is news, Julia thought. And so everything started so well. Her husband's arrival, his repentance, the possibility of a divorce, and a box. Woo, what a day. It all came at once, but nothing, we'll figure it out. Carrot Cat poked and began to lose, and her chin encourages her aspirations. Say, mistress, everything will work out. Don't upset her nor looked around and wiped her tears. What's there to say? It's not worth it for old offenses to spoil the life, which began to get better, and the rest. Julia, under what circumstances did you lose the ability to feel your legs? The question embarrassed her, but she was ready for it. Yeah, you know, my husband hit me once. I fell, and I lost feeling in my legs. But there's no fracture, no nerve damage, just a bad bruise, that's all. Doctors say it could be psychosis. But what if they tried? Nothing's working. Aha, but I've seen it happen more than once, particularly when working with soldiers coming out of the war. And by the way, there's a solution there. Griessive massages and applications, mineral water baths. You know, excuse me, what's your name? Oleg, just Oleg. So Oleg, I'm a therapist myself. I've tried a lot of methods of means of techniques, but nothing at all. Well, you haven't had me until now. I'm not a magician, I'm just learning. But I'll try to get you back on your feet, so you're sure I can walk. Julia was lying on the improvised massage table, under which they took a wide bench, and smiled. There's no fracture. The nerves, as you say, are intact, so I don't see any serious reason why you can't walk or feel your legs. So the man pressed a point on her foot, but in such a way that Julia cried out. A current ran through her leg with terrible force, and she could have sworn 220 volts had been run through it. Oleg, did you just run electricity through my body? Electricity? No, I'm working on your active points, which temporarily fell asleep, became inactive, and were responsible for your legs. And what I'm seeing, I like it already. So I can give you back your legs, sensation, and mobility. Now just relax and enjoy. With every massage, with every touch of my hands, the feet didn't chew. They were responding to the touch, becoming docile. She could even move her fingers on the tables already, but she could not yet stand on them fully. Even so, the results pleased her immensely. Andrew, can you imagine? I can feel my legs. I'll be able to walk soon. And that's the best thing that's happened to me lately. But besides the fact that I moved here and met you honestly, you're glad you came here and met me. And that's a no-brainer, isn't it? You have become to me not just a friend and a helper, but something more than a friend. Julia, do you remember what I told you earlier? She looked at him carefully, trying to remember what he might have said to her. But so far it was not coming out well. I don't think you do. But I'll remind you, as soon as you're back on your feet, I'll ask you to marry. Wow, Andrew. I don't even know how I'm supposed to react to that. You don't. Just first stand on your feet, get on your feet without a stick, and then think whether to accept my proposal or not. The young woman smiled and lowered her head, trying to hide her joy in her smile and the bright sparks in her eyes. She had the pleasant words of a man she had been waiting for so long. Yes, I'll think about it then. In the meantime, you will help me to disperse, because how to go to the registry office in a wedding dress and with a stick in his hand? It wouldn't be very pretty. No, it wouldn't. You'd have to match the wand to the dress. And I'll tell you, that could be a problem in particular. If the wand is masculine, not feminine, no stones or flowers, and all that. Wouldn't you agree, Andrew? Yeah, I'll have to figure out where to get you one or have it customized. Well, why don't you tell me how your results with the masseur went? It's great. My legs are regaining sensation. By the way, Andrew, I'm gonna need your help. I have a husband coming to my house this Sunday, and I really don't want to face him alone. Will you be there for me? Of course, I'll always be there for you. And that was the truth. Andrew was practically always there for her. In her darkest moments, Peter never showed up. He didn't want to look her in the eye and apologize, but he did file for divorce, which he notified her about in a little note. That's fine. I'm glad I didn't have to meet you in person, and I forgave you a long time ago. So you're done with your sins. I'll try to take care of mine. In a few weeks, she received a divorce certificate, and 6 months later, she was choosing a wedding dress in a bridal salon. And Tony Julia was there to help her. But why him? You're getting married again. Tony, but you're my friend, and he's my husband-to-be. I invited you to this wedding ahead of time so you wouldn't have to go through the motions. Don't let anything happen to you this time. Tony, you say that again, and I'll beat you up for sure. No, I know you're heavy-handed, so let's just try on a wedding dress and decide which one's best. Otherwise, you'll never pick one. And you're definitely getting married in a tracksuit. Oh yeah, it's so comfortable, and you don't have to worry about matching sneakers. I'll say, the wedding ceremony was modest and quiet with a minimum of guests, but still solemn and beautiful. And of course, they were married in the local church by Father John. And Tony, as an old friend, witnessed, Ava's farmhouse to Not On Here are the keys to the house. I've already transferred the deeds to you, and may it be your new family nest. Yeah, thanks, man. Because this is where I met my happiness and got back on my feet in every sense of the word. You're my best friend and comrade. Without you, I would never have been happy. I would have sat in my apartment and spent my days and nights alone. And here. And there's a new happiness waiting for us. Yes, my darling. Yes, my dear man. I couldn't have gotten back on my feet without you, nor without the help of our spiritual advisor, Father John. So please, everyone to our celebration. We've booked a small restaurant, so it's gonna be family style. I don't want any flashy lights. Really, what's she need it for? She's got a family now, a husband, a house of her own. And maybe there'll be kids. Who knows, maybe these places will really help her to get pregnant again and find the joy of motherhood. And let everything be well with Peter. And she at that moment sincerely wished him well. From the bottom of her heart, even in spite of the grief he had brought her. Maybe she wouldn't have met her true happiness without it. Who knows?
Subscribe and click the bell. Miranda was agitated and excited. She had been busy in the kitchen since morning. In the middle of the day, her refrigerator was no longer able to hold the numerous appetizers and salads. On the stove, there was a huge pot of roast from the oven. Came intoxicating aromas of such a pie with berry filling. The woman was still circling between the table and the cupboard, figuring out what else she could create from the food at her disposal. Despite the abundance of dishes, Miranda felt that she had prepared too little food and the guests would go hungry. And the guests were expected to be important. A few days ago, Miranda and Sebastian Jenkins' daughter accepted a marriage proposal from her fiancé David for the city. And today, Jenkins was scheduled to meet David's out-of-town parents, and Miranda was terribly afraid of making a mess of things in front of her new in-laws. She looked thoughtfully into the refrigerator, wondering if she should add some raw slices to the existing slices. When Sebastian's husband entered the kitchen, assessing the situation, he walked over to his wife, put his arm around her, and gently pushed her away from the stock of provisions. "Miranda, calm down," he said affectionately. "You've already cooked enough to feed a company of soldiers. The guests won't eat it. They won't even be able to taste it." Do you think the woman was hesitant to go to the refrigerator? "I keep thinking there's something missing. Everything is enough, and even with a surplus," reassured her husband. "You'll see for yourself. Then we'll finish it for 2 more days, as if you're not happy about it." On the business of Miranda's husband, he laughed. "Glad, of course. A kitchen full of goodies. Of course I'm glad. I see you're sweet and sour, and the meat's confused. Why are you trying so hard?" "Me and Kevin are nervous," my wife confessed frankly. "What if we don't like each other? What if something goes wrong? The first impression is the strongest. David's parents won't like some little thing. That's it. And we have to communicate with them later about the wedding, and in general with relatives to be friends. And there's a big age difference between us. Maybe we won't hit it off." Sebastian and Miranda married late after 30, and their daughter was born even closer to 40 years old. Now the daughter was 22 years old, and the parents were approaching 60 years. In the family of the future son-in-law, everything was exactly the opposite. For city elders played a wedding almost immediately after school, and a year later gave birth to a son. They weren't even 40 yet, and their future daughter-in-law's parents could act as their parents at the same time. Miranda, it was very unsettling. "Don't worry prematurely," Sebastian reassured his wife. "Don't you think we don't have many young acquaintances? A lot, and we communicate with all of them somehow. At the very least, apply your professional skills to go for the city. We're fascinated by all native. Extinguishes the oven and let's go. We'll have a little rest. We'll have some tea. Worse? No. For the guests, than a tired and withdrawn hostess. They'll be here in 300 hours. That'll give you time to catch your breath and take a shower. And I'll set the table while you're here. Yeah, Lisa will help. Don't worry, we'll make it perfect." "Oh, my heart is racing." Miranda sighed. "And if something goes wrong, Lisa will be upset too." Lisa was the name of the Jenkins daughter, the bride-to-be, which is what all the fuss was about. Actually, Miranda wanted to name her daughter Lisa, and Sebastian was fine with it. But as often happens, the young mother had no time to deal with the paperwork for the baby, and this duty was entrusted to the newly minted father. But here's the trouble. On the day when Sebastian was going to visit the registry office, he was attacked by some insidious virus. In the morning, the man felt only a slight malaise. But in the middle of the day, he had a fever, ran a very bad runny nose, covered his throat. Somehow Jenkins waited until work was over. He had asked his bosses to leave early so that he could get to the registry office before closing time. Overcoming weakness, he got to the office, but because of a runny nose, he pronounced his daughter's name inaudibly. At the end of the day, the woman who was working on the birth certificate did not ask him to repeat the name, but wrote it down as she heard it. Sebastian himself was in agony and fever. Neither did he reread the documents issued to him, just took the papers and went to his parents. He reasoned that it was not worth bringing a contagion into a house where a newborn child lived. He was given a week's sick leave. A few days later, when the weakness receded, and Sebastian, taking advantage of his free time, as a decent parent, took copies of the documents to the clinic, to the milk kitchen, to the accounting department of the institute where he and Miranda worked, and to some other organizations that had to be notified of the baby's arrival. This is how Miranda found out that her daughter's name was Robert and not Lisa, only 10 days after the birth certificate was issued. And that document had already been seen by so many organizations that it would have been too much of a hassle to redo it. The woman grumbled at Sebastian, of course, for a long time. But to the name of her daughter got used to unexpectedly, quickly. Especially her mother-in-law, having learned about the mishap, said with a laugh. And that she even suits this name. Look how thin and flexible she is. Lisa is Lisa. Jenkins was indeed born skinny and thin. No counter and no tugging. There was no infant resemblance at all, but the flexibility and firmness was there from birth. And that's what my mother-in-law accurately pointed out. Miranda had to put a lot of effort into swaddling the baby. Lisa turned from diapers, described from diapers, and even using the decay of legs, somehow expressed. This is how she grew up slender, thin, flexible, and willful. But despite the girl's unruly character, her mother loved her very much and worried about her daughter. Almost as much as in her childhood. That's why she was worried now before meeting her future relatives. She wanted everything to go off without a hitch. Good, at least with David, future son-in-law Jenkins, were familiar with a long time ago. We cannot worry unnecessarily. Who did the bloodline decide to marry? David was a positive guy in every sense, and Miranda and Sebastian liked him very much. Young people met right after graduation. David and his classmates celebrated the awarding of diplomas in the same restaurant as Robert fellow students. The girl studied at the PhilFac, and David in a technical university at the Faculty of Road Maintenance. Girls and men quickly took notice of each other. They got reacquainted and soon mingled. This evening formed several strong, stable couples, and Robert and David were among them. True, with the wedding they lasted longer than the rest of the fellow students. Robert wanted to find a good and steady job before the wedding. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming a journalist. But in her time, she did not get enough points in the profile faculty, so she applied for the philological faculty. Starting from the second year, the girl tried herself as a freelance correspondent in different city and regional editions. But quite quickly it became clear that the text was not cramped. She wanted to illustrate her words at least with photos, or better, with video. That's the only way the girl thought. It is possible to penetrate the modern news consumer, to convey to him what you really want to say. Therefore, having received a diploma, the girl began to storm television. It took her 6 months to get on a local TV channel, and another 6 months to get a foothold there and become in demand. Even a relatively popular correspondent, whose stories viewers waited for, watched with attention, and discussed later both in kitchens and on social networks. All the while, David, immediately after graduation, having got a job in one of the city's construction trusts, courted the rising star of the screen and waited for her consent to the wedding. And then he did. Lisa came running home an hour before the guests arrived. She brought the drinks, helped set the table, shared the abundance and variety of treats. The out-of-towners showed up on time. And half an hour after the start of the feast, Miranda realized that she was worried for nothing. Kelly and John, David's parents, turned out to be very nice people, calm, friendly, cheerful. Kelly was a housewife. She called it still herself, and in between, taking care of the house. John was engaged in entrepreneurship, kept a small manufacturing company, but did not want to talk in detail about his work. Give at least here to rest from business. The man joked back. Make friends with the parents of the future son-in-law managed to quickly enough, and the difference in age did not prevent rapprochement. So Zagorodny Sr. quickly agreed that they will not impose their wedding format on the children. Let the celebration will be held the way the young people want. I think it's the best option, Kelly said. I remember my own wedding with horror. Mom and Dad said since we all pay for everything, we decide who to invite and where to party. And what did we get? A room full of some strange older relatives for the ransom. In the best rustic traditions, music old Toastmaster with silly contests. I wasn't even allowed to choose a dress like I wanted in the registry office. It was some kind of cake. In white rose-colored glasses, I still cannot look at the photos. Yeah, backed up John. It was a tiring event, but it's never too late to get it right. Miranda smiled softly. Now in the registry office, you can order a simple registration. Not real, but solemn and even away. At least in nature, at the beach, at home. And have a new wedding just the way you want it. Yes, Sebastian confirmed. We did that for our 25th wedding anniversary. The couple wanted to be romantic. So we did it again. We rented a Miranda dress. They organized a tuxedo for me. And we renewed our vows at the wedding palace. And you know, I was skeptical at first, but at the end of it, I got emotional. I think even more than I did at my real wedding, he laughed. John hummed skeptically, but Kelly was fascinated by the idea, and she began to ask with curiosity and interest how to organize everything, how much the ceremony cost, what are the requirements. Slightly frightened by his wife's enthusiasm, Zagorodny tried to restrain her. Kelly, wait. While we now have a wedding of children is more important. How about we do both ceremonies on the same day? Lisa immediately suggested it. That would be so great, so romantic. And again, the concept. Intergenerational. Continuity within the family. It's like nothing anyone's ever done before. The discussion went to a new level. The women loved the idea. David, as the groom, supported the thread in everything. But the older men quickly got tired of the enthusiastic plans of the group and retired to the balcony for a smoke. Having returned from a smoke break, they began to change plates on the table and finally brought hot food from the kitchen. Only with this they managed to interrupt the conversation and direct it in a new direction. Everything is so delicious, John said delightedly. I've never had a roast like this before. Miranda, are you a cook by any chance? No, are you? Laughed the venerable Miranda. I'm an honored pensioner. Cooking is a hobby. I used to work in a completely different field. I'm a psychologist, and not just a psychologist, but a doctor of psychology, emphasized Sebastian. With a meaningful thumbs up. I've never been able to reach such heights. Sebastian and I worked at the same institute, Miranda explained. Only he stopped at the master's thesis and abandoned his doctoral thesis. But I had the patience. Wait, John interrupted the woman. What do you mean? Were there psychologists in the Soviet Union? It seemed to me that they only proliferated in the last 10 to 15 years. The Jenkins looked at each other and laughed. Even Lisa laughed heartily at her future father-in-law's delusions. You're right about something, John. From the media, I said Miranda. Active popularization of psychology in our country really started only in the early noughties. But this science itself is not the first 10 years or even 100 years old. And in the Soviet Union it certainly was. Only in those years there was more demand for social psychology. The course was to work with the team on the compatibility of its participants. There were psychologists at schools, of course, at factories, at large organizations, but their activities were aimed at strengthening the corporate spirit, as they would say nowadays. And for the most part, specialists working in psychoneurological dispensaries were engaged in solving personal problems and detecting diseases, and they were of little value. I'd worked there for a while too. I was interested in interaction with specific people. I went into this profession wanting to help people, but then I saw the attitude to such help and went into science. How did you find out about the profession in the first place if it wasn't on the radar? Kelly asked. Why did it suddenly occur to you to become a psychologist? After all, you can help people in many places. Oh, that's a very interesting story. David suddenly cut in. It's not even a story of career guidance, it's a family story. Tell it, Miranda. Well, the short story was Jenkins, but her future son-in-law interrupted her. No, don't. Just tell it short, like they told me. So you already know it all by heart. Sebastian mocked the young man. So what? David objected. I like the way Miranda tells it. And the story is interesting. And Mom and Dad will understand everything about you. But now we're intrigued. John said insistently. Miranda, after such publicity you can't help telling. In fact, John did not want the conversation to return to the discussion of the wedding and the decorative registration of his wife. For the sake of it, he was willing to listen even to a family tale, though he didn't really like such stories. But he liked the wedding ceremony even less, and he didn't want to participate in such a reenactment. John expected that the story would distract his wife from the idea given at the beginning of the evening, and then she would forget about it. So he enthusiastically began to persuade his future relative to tell the story. However, Miranda especially did not resist. After a roast with tea and cake, she began her story. Miranda Kendall. In the future, Jenkins was born in a small village Putilova 200 kilometers from the regional center. She was the youngest child in the family. Her parents had 2 older sons and a daughter. And like all younger children, Miranda grew up spoiled and loved. Although there was nothing to spoil the girl, they lived modestly. Christopher, Miranda's father, worked on the collective farm as a tractor driver. Mother Cindy Larkins worked there as a milkmaid. Simple, quiet, hard-working people. They received an average wage, kept a large farm. And Badja was chewed up at home. However, a simple countryman could be called only Christopher. With Cindy in it, all was a little more interesting. Christopher was a man of the countryside. Miranda's mother had been born on the road and had lived her entire childhood there with her parents and numerous siblings. Miranda Larkin's grandfather was chairman of the Putilov Collective Farm. Grandmother Clara worked there as a bookkeeper. Daughter Cindy was born to them just after the war. After about a year, grandfather and grandmother tried to give education to all their children. They encouraged them to read books and be interested in various sciences. Good studies at school. This approach paid off. Cindy's 2 older sisters had already graduated from universities in the city and were slowly making their way into the world. The older brothers were excellent in school. They were predicted a bright future. And Cindy herself studied diligently and was regularly praised by teachers. The girl planned to become a doctor, but fate ordered otherwise. When Cindy was 10 years old, her parents were arrested. Her father was accused of embezzlement and misappropriation of collective farm property. Mother was taken with him for company. Reasoned that the chairman of the collective farm could steal state property with the complicity of the bookkeeper. In fact, there was no embezzlement. There were only inconvenient nationality of the father and an anonymous letter that came on him to the district administration. And then the punitive machine spun very quickly. One evening, 3 children of school children, Cindy and her 2 brothers, were left without parents. Where were the adults taken away? Where to look for them? How long will they serve their sentence? Neither the younger children nor their older sisters, who had traveled from the city to arrange custody, were able to find out. Much later, the older sister told Cindy that the alleged embezzlement was just a pretext for arrest. And at the trial, the prosecutors went all out, portraying the parents as enemies of Soviet power, Zionists, terrorists, and God knows who else, simply because of their nationality. As a child, from the conversations of her elders, Cindy realized that everything was the fault of her parents' positions. Everything is the fault of her parents' positions in a small collective farm. The chairman of the accountant is practically the upper class, the elite. There is always someone who is jealous and wants to live in the light. So to live a quiet life, you have to keep your head down. So reasoned the 10-year-old girl, especially if you come from a Jewish family. And if your parents were arrested and taken to the camps, it's better to live modestly, but quietly and peacefully, than to make your way into the world, risking your life. No, Cindy didn't drop out. She graduated from high school with honors and even turned from Cindy to Cindy Larkins, but she did not stop reading books and interested in science and medicine, in particular, subscribing to various general education magazines, watching educational programs on television when it appeared in the house. She was a woman, intelligent, erudite, finely sensitive with excellent artistic taste, but having finished 10 years of school, did not go to the city to enter the institute, and got a job in her native collective farm on the simplest and most inconspicuous job. So she spent her whole life in it, refusing even to be promoted to foreman of milkmaids. It seemed to her that even such an insignificant career advancement would bring danger to her and her family. Cindy's older brothers and sisters left for cities and towns. The girl stayed in her native village. For a while she lived in her parents' house. But soon after graduation, Cindy married Christopher Kendall and moved into a hut, which was allocated to him by the collective farm. The girl for a long time rejected the advances of the visiting guy. It even came to the point that she hid from him in the backyard. But Christopher was persistent and continued to pursue Cindy persistently and methodically. In the end, Cindy summoned him for a conversation and told him about her biography, about her arrested parents. "Should you ruin your life by associating with the daughter of an enemy of the people?" she asked, having finished the story. "So it is necessary." Angrily replied Christopher, "We have a son is not responsible for the father, I forgot, and a daughter is not responsible for her father either." And knowing where these enemies of the people come from, a month later they got married, and a few years later the young built their own house and moved there with their first child. And the house of their beloved parents was empty and decrepit by the time of the birth of their youngest daughter, Miranda. From it remained almost one hulk towering among the weeds and frightening the children, the failing windows. Cindy sometimes took her daughter there. The two of them would walk around the property, jumping on the floor balcony inside the ruins. And Cindy Larkins would tell how things used to be here, and Miranda would listen and memorize. The girl got into the habit of visiting the old house once a week, of spending some time in it talking about the weathered walls, about her life. It seemed to her that her grandparents were invisibly present among these ruins, listening to her and delighted granddaughters' stories. Miranda decided to visit the abandoned house twice a week and strictly adhered to the schedule. Only in winter did she sometimes miss visits in the worst of the frost. The year the girl turned 10, the winter was warm and snowy. One January day, the girl sat in the ruins until almost dusk, telling at home how she and her relatives celebrated the new year. She caught up only when a snowstorm started outside. Miranda, she realized, had to get out, or the path to the street was barely trampled. She'd notice in no time. Heavily, shuffling her feet through the snow, the girl got out on the shriveled porch of the house and saw that a man was sitting on the Leningrad. Looking closer, she realized that the alien had been here for a long time. Small drifts of snow had managed to gather on his shoulders and top. Miranda was wary, but she realized she had nowhere to go. She would have to leave the lot anyway. She couldn't just sit around. She moved forward with determination, reasoned that if a man tried to attack her, she'd raise a ruckus. A dozen meters from the family ruins stood an apartment building across the street, another. Would anyone hear her screams? Barely past the lot. The path was already partially snowed over. The girl equaled the fence and found herself a couple steps away from the stranger. Looking closer, Miranda realized that on the remnants of the fence sat a woman, almost an old woman. She was dressed in some inconceivable rags. Her head was covered with a scarf. The old woman's face was unfamiliar, and it was puzzling. The village, though it had grown in recent years, but it was still small. All the inhabitants knew each other in one way or another, but this woman Miranda had never seen. She could have sworn it. The old woman sat motionless and paid no attention to the girl, didn't even turn her head in her direction. She did not seem to see Miranda. The girl began to look at the stranger and suddenly saw that tears were flowing down the alien's cheeks. "Grandmother, why are you crying?" loudly asked Miranda. The old woman did not answer, and it seemed she did not even hear that she was being addressed. The girl repeated the question and then began to shake the old woman by the shoulders. "You're all right. What's wrong? Why are you sitting here?" inquired she. "You're freezing. We should go home." Would you like me to walk you home?" Miranda's efforts were successful. The stranger finally snapped out of her trance and saw the girl. Hearing what she was being told, the old woman only sighed and shook her head. "There's no place for me to go, sweetheart," she said hoarsely, as if in a chicken voice. "I have no home." "But where did you come from?" Miranda wondered. "From afar, sweetheart," said the old woman, still monotonous, like a broken record. "I'll never make it back." How could it be? The girl was seriously upset. For some reason, a strange woman had caught her eye. "You can't just sit here, can you? It'll be night soon. The blizzard's coming. You're freezing to death." The old woman just nodded her head. The prospect of freezing to death didn't seem to bother her at all. "Come with me," Miranda said decisively. "Come and visit us. My parents are good, don't be afraid. And the house is big enough for you to sleep here." And then decide what to do next, she demandingly pulled the stranger by the arm. "Come on, let's go, or he'll notice the road. We'll never make it. My goodness, you've turned into a snowdrift." The girl managed to push the old woman out of the way, rising heavily from the debris of the fence. The stranger followed her. Miranda held the old woman's hand tightly, afraid that she would suddenly change her mind or simply get lost in the snow swirls. They reached the house after dark. Cindy Larkins was peering out the window and, seeing her daughter, jumped out on the porch. "Where they carry you grumpily," she grumbled. I kept my eyes peering. "It's nighttime. The storm is raging. And you are schlepped somewhere." The woman noticed the guest, which her daughter persistently pulled behind her all, and remained silent, then hesitantly spoke. "Hello, Mom. It's Grandma who's lost," Miranda explained. "I brought her to us. She says she doesn't know where her home is or where to go. Let her wait here tonight. We can't let her go out in this weather. We can't." The mother agreed and turned to the old woman and invited her to come in, please. "Here, develop here. You can hang your coat here." Cindy Larkins helped the alien to undress. Under the coat turned out to be worn another one, and under it a glass fungus sole of strange color. It seemed never to have been cleaned once in its life, when all the outer clothes were hoisted on a hanger. The old woman appeared skinny, if not skinny. The shawl from her head she was reeling, and Cindy Larkins had evidently taken to fiddling, fitting both his topcoat and Valenki. By the stove, Mama was pestering Miranda. It was Granny who said she came from far away. "So she's not from our village. I don't know her. See if you recognize her. Maybe she's a local after all. They say old people sometimes forget where they live." "It happens," the woman responded. She took the old woman to the corner between the stove and the table, the warmest place in the kitchen, seated her on a chair covered with a soft thread, leaned over the guest, looked into her face, and suddenly froze, scrutinizing his features. For several minutes, the two women, old and young, gazing at each other. Miranda became subdued, but looked at them both. She was surprised to hear her mother suddenly ask the old woman in a stern voice, "Laura?" The alien nodded in response and, in turn, asked the landlady Cindy a question. "Cindy Larkins is now Kendall," mumbled the woman and cried. Hugging her guest tightly and resting her nose on the top of her head, the old woman picked up Cindy Larkins, but with both hands she pushed her nose into her chest and, from the sounds of it, cried too. Miranda watched the scene with all her eyes. I think she even forgot to blink. The door slammed behind her. Christopher's father entered the house. After assessing the situation, he loudly asked Cindy what was going on. Yes, Cindy, the sane woman, raised her face at her husband, flooded with tears. To Miranda's surprise, it was completely happy. "Meet Christopher," she said. "This is your mother-in-law, Clara. Sarah is my mother." Hugs she did not ponder. And the old woman, though she turned to her son-in-law, continued to hold on to her daughter with both hands. Christopher was quick to recognize the situation. "Pleased to meet you," he said politely to the guest. "So why are you standing there? Let's get the table ready. Grandma, you go, we need to feed." See, Mother is busy. Let's manage." He shook the girl by the shoulder, and only then Miranda was able to shake off her surprised stupor and began to organize in the kitchen. Szlar was released from the colony 2 years ago due to the end of his sentence. None of her relatives knew about it, and there was no one to inform her of the release. During the first year of her imprisonment, Slaga strictly forbade her older children to write to her. She was afraid that such correspondence could affect their reputation in a bad way and hinder their future life. After that, she stopped replying to the letters of her daughters and sons, and later she was transferred several times from one camp to another, from place to place. And when her youngest daughter, Cindy, grew old enough to have the right to search for her mother, it was impossible to find her. Cindy sent inquiries to various authorities for several years, but it seems that the bureaucrats and the penal system themselves were confused by the paperwork and were unable to give the young woman a clear answer. I did not know my children's 3 new addresses, and my own old home address, during the time in captivity, have forgotten. She only remembered the name of the village where she had once lived with her husband. That's where she decided to go. The camp authorities issued a certificate of release and some road from the colony to the village, past which the railroad passed. The woman hitched a ride. It was not far to go, about 20 kilometers away. At the station, she spent a long time finding out from the cashier how to get to the village, or rather to the center of the region in which the village was located. She and the cashier figured out the route. But here's the trouble. There were no tickets for passing trains. They said to wait. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. She had nothing to do, so she decided to walk around the village near the station. The village was small, not very well maintained. There were no sights or amenities, but the woman didn't care. She was delighted by the very possibility of walking anywhere, without having to answer to anyone and without fear of breaking any rules. She wandered through the streets and alleys, looking at houses and yards, rubbing the backs of stray dogs. Sit down to rest on benches by the fences. It was September. Trees in golden foliage looked incredibly beautiful. The weather was warm and the air was fresh. Clara lost track of time, and when she found herself on the outskirts of the village, she was surprised to notice that it was beginning to get dark. The old woman moved back towards the station, hoping to spend the night at the tiny station. But at that moment, someone hit her hard on the back of the head. Clara fell to the ground and lost consciousness. She woke up in complete darkness and found herself lying in the storm. I tried to get up, but the back of my head hurt treacherously. My head was spinning. My throat was receding, nausea sticking from the fence. The woman sank back down into the thicket, examined herself under the giving grasses, arms, legs intact. Her head was not pierced. No blood, but thickets all around. The knot of Kaz is not rich yet. Not there either. I'm angry. What kind of robber went for old rags and a loaf of bread? Nearly took his life. Who do you think you're robbing? You can tell from a mile away that she's an ex-convict. They see them regularly in the village. They've learned to recognize them by now. But then Clara noticed that she wasn't wearing a trench coat and groped her body and clothes. The woman realized not only her poor belongings were stolen, the certificate of release and the little money she had were gone too. And that was a problem. She couldn't leave without her papers. The only way to legally buy a ticket from here was to show her ID. She couldn't get a passport either. And she was supposed to register with the police within a certain period of time, get a residence permit, and settle some bureaucratic formalities. If she doesn't do that, she'll go back to jail. Shit, I don't want to do that. Even the loss of money didn't bother him as much as the loss of the certificate. But what to do? Where to go? With a complaint of robbery, the woman could not understand. In fact, she couldn't even run. When she tried to stand upright, she began to feel dizzy. Consciousness threatened to leave her long-suffering head. Little by little, her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, and Clara could see a small barn nearby behind a low fence. The woman crawled toward it, climbing over the fence, which, fortunately, was no higher than her knee. climbed inside and entrenched herself in Navalny in the construction of the hayloft. I'll give it up for a while, she thought, and then I'll decide how to be, not to lie under the fence. With this thought, Revu fell asleep. She was awakened by the owner of the barn, who noticed the intrusion into his territory. He was a sturdy old man. He swore at first, but not in a mean way. "What are you doing with that fence?" "My flower has fallen." He got angry. "You could have knocked on the house, asked to spend the night like a human being. Wouldn't he have let you in? We are all human beings. We all treat your brother with understanding." However, having heard about the alarm about what had happened, the muzhikhak stopped grumbling. He brought his suddenly and guests water and a crust of bread, and himself disappeared, to return soon with a policeman and a local paramedic. The police representative questioned Riva in detail about what had happened to her during the night. He examined the territory, asked for written explanations from the old woman and from the owner of the plot. The paramedic examined the old woman and diagnosed her with a concussion. At least a couple weeks of bed rest was recommended. The man, who introduced himself as Stephen, carried her into the house, arranged her on a shell bed in the kitchen, told her to rest and gain strength. "Anyway, until your documents are resolved, you will not be able to go anywhere," he explained. Stephen said that Clara was not the first in their village to be attacked. For a year now there have been some kind of seagulls in the neighborhood, hunting for ex-convicts. To recognize them among the locals was simple criminals Spodarowatel, or people who came out of the camp and poked them intimidated, and sometimes just attacked from the back and publicized, as it happened with Lika, and then robbed afterward. Why? The old woman was perplexed. What good would they do to us? There's nothing to take from us. No property, not even pennies on the road. "Oh, you silly Clara," Stephen lamented. "And the documents are a certificate of release. That's their main prey. And that's what they're after. And what do they do with certificates? Do they get free train tickets?" I continued to wonder. "Do they need those tickets?" Waved Stephen away. "You understand that the most important thing in the certificate is that you can get a real passport with it. No check will not dig up. And with this passport you can do so much with it, or sell it for good money. And these crooks know exactly who needs such a document. They correct the certificates in Ashen as they need them. They change the year of birth, change the photo, glue it to these papers at the passport office. They look very closely, especially if the passport office is far from the camp. So they go far away. And then they use the stolen documents to get passports. That's what our district officer told me," he explained. "These bastards have been hanging around here for a long time. But they can't catch them. They're running all over the neighborhood. And with their traveling, it's all over the country." The effects of the concussion took a long time to wear off. Her weakness became her constant companion. She stayed at Stephen's for over a month. During this time in the local militia you gave the woman a new certificate, and she received a passport here in the village. You had to go to the permanent place of residence to get the documents. There was no time to go there. The legal deadline was coming to an end. Stephen persuaded the old woman to winter at his place. The man lived alone. His parents had died long ago. He had no wife and children. His brothers and sisters were partly scattered across the country and partly taken away by the war. He was glad to be alive. He was glad to have a soul in the house. He reasoned that it was worth to gain strength and recover before a long trip. Besides, the winter promised cold, and there were no warm clothes. Until the end of May, she lived in the house of her savior, kept house, cooked food. She worked part-time as a cleaner in the village Novi Club, in order to save at least a little money for the road to her native village. When summer came, she got ready to go. She felt better, noticeably stronger. She felt less dizzy. And what about the occasional memory lapse? She tried to ignore that. She said goodbye warmly to Stephen. The man had packed her a substantial bag of provisions for the journey and wanted to give her some money, but she decided that her own savings would suffice. The journey was supposed to take a couple of weeks, but somehow it took almost a year and a half. How come? Leek didn't finish listening. Fell asleep exhausted by the events of the evening. Already later she mentioned that at some point she forgot where she was going. And when she came to her senses, she found herself at an unfamiliar station with no provisions and almost no money. She traveled part of the way on foot. Sometimes she caught a hitchhiker, rode as a hare between the train cars, asked for alms, asked for lodging in villages, slept at the stations, on benches, wherever she had to. And when after all the ordeals she finally reached Putilov and saw her native house in ruins, she almost lost her mind. It became clear that the long journey had been made in vain. There were no relatives. There was nowhere to bow one's head. Of course, one could walk through the village, look for people who remembered her, stay with them. But the old woman was afraid. She still didn't know which of the villagers had written that unfortunate anonymous letter about her and Larkins. But just in case, she trusted no one else. From fatigue and confusion, the old woman fell into a kind of mental trance. In this state, she sat on the cook fence of her former home for over an hour. She would surely have frozen there if Miranda hadn't noticed her. Destiny. The adults alone spoke with significance. It's all mysterious. Others echoed them. I thought nothing was fate. There was no mysticism and mystery in her meeting with her grandmother. It's just that for so many years she'd been calling her home. With her constant stories, with her presence in her house. Grandma just couldn't help but hear. So it's all right. The Kendalls had set up Slaga in a passageway room. The rest of the rooms in the house were occupied. Daughter and son-in-law fixed up the old lady. Did the department grant her a pension? By spring, Clara recovered from her long journey and joined the life of the family. Cindy Larkins clearly thanked all the gods in the world every day for bringing her mother back. Miranda adored her grandmother, even though she was not a sugary character. The old lady was her own free-spirited, risk-taking self, but her relatives forgave her for it. Everyone realized that if she had been God's dandelion, she simply would not have survived either in the camp or after it. Cindy wrote to her sisters and brothers about her mother's return, and all summer long the Kendall family had a pilgrimage of guests of joyful guests. Was that summer happy, filled with the brightest emotions? But with the onset of fall, a serious problem arose in the house. She began to scream in her sleep, talking loudly with interlocutors unknown to anyone. "Give me my bread, or all the assholes are pulling," she shrieked in the middle of the night. "The certificate. My certificate. Where is it? They'll put me back in camp without it. I don't want to." The scream woke up the family. The next night, everything hurts inside. The old woman read in the night, without thinking, "The eye of the bishop. Why such a punishment? It's like I'm being torn to pieces," she called at the top of her voice. "Fooled him. Where are you dragging him? You bastards." These cries woke up the whole house. At first, they were repeated about once a week. But by midwinter, Clara was getting the whole family out of bed every day. She herself remembered nothing of the bad dreams or her screams, but would only shut up when her daughter or grandchildren pulled her out of her sleep. The old woman was embarrassed by the trouble she caused her loved ones, but she couldn't help herself. Sleeping pills and sedatives that the village paramedic offered did not help. After them, on the contrary, it became more difficult to wake up the old woman during her nightmares. She should be treated in a psychoneurological dispensary, thoughtfully said the local medic Cindy. At these words exploded. "Do you want me to send my own mother to a mental institution? That's the last thing we need." But nevertheless, Kendall's life was becoming increasingly difficult. The family stopped getting enough sleep. Grandma's seizures could recur several times a night, and there was no rest in between. Christopher and Cindy became irritable. They often complained of fatigue. No wonder, because after restless nights they had to go to work. Yes, it's not easy shifting papers in a warm office. And doing physical labor. Miranda and her older brother also felt the impact of not having enough to eat. although it was a little easier for them as children than for adults. It went on like this until the spring. By May, Cindy Larkins was ready, if not to accept the paramedics' suggestion that the old woman be treated in a mental hospital, then at least to discuss it further. She and her husband were completely exhausted and didn't know what to do. Miranda, hearing the conversation of the elders, realized that the grandmother would not approve of the treatment. Moreover, she would be angry at her daughter for such a decision. And then Miranda would be angry with her. The girl suggested to her mother to move the old woman to her room. She lived in the farthest corner of the house from her parents' bedroom and hoped that from there she would not hear her scream so much. "She'll give you no peace at all," Cindy Larkins lamented. "So what?" Miranda waved it off. "It's summer. I don't have to get up for school during the day. At least you and Daddy will have a rest." Was the girl so convincing, Mother? Too exhausted. But soon the old woman's relocation took place. The first few nights the girl swore, jumping out of bed, hearing another scream. However, after a few days she thought that it was possible to try to cope with the grandmother after a nightmare sleep and forced booth. The old lady fell asleep for a long time, noise contrived, complaining about the fact that it disturbs her granddaughter. It's exhausting even more than her shouting. And Miranda decided to come up with a way to soothe her without waking her from sleep. At first, the girl simply approached her grandmother, barely hearing her voice, stroked her head, and on her hands quietly and affectionately coaxed her. "It's a dream, Grandma," she repeated patiently. "It's not real. It's all right. You are at home. No one is hurting you. Mommy and Daddy are there for you. They'll protect you." But the old woman just didn't hear her granddaughter. And then Miranda devised another plan. The next night in the next bed, there were cries. "That's my bread, give it back, to whom I say, you shameful thief." Miranda sneaked up on her grandmother and spoke persuasively. "Here's your bread, girl. Nobody's taking it away from you. I took it to salt you with salt, it tastes better. Here." The girl repeated it several times, and suddenly Clara heard her. "It tastes better with salt," she agreed. "Thank you. Forgive me, I was scared." The old woman turned sideways and fell asleep peacefully. Miranda froze enthusiastically at her bedside. Had it really worked? The rest of the night passed surprisingly quietly. In the morning, the lyricist rose awake before noon. She wanted to tell her grandmother about the night's events, but with some sixth sense she realized that it was not worth it. Instead, she asked her grandmother, "You sometimes yell about bread at night. Did someone really take it away from you?" "True," the old woman replied reluctantly. "I had just been brought to the first camp in Barak, and there was a woman who tried to take my rations. I attacked her. Where did the anger come from? I don't know." My grandmother was silent, and then she added, "But you know, I remember now that she gave me back my piece. She said she wanted to salt it." Miranda nodded her head. She didn't know how the story of the stolen harmonica really ended, but she suspected that the outcome was not as peaceful as her grandmother saw it today. She remembered the phrase about salt from a dream in which her granddaughter had intervened. The girl decided to continue her experiments, but not only to appease her grandmother, but also out of research interest. The next night, barely beyond the dream, she began to wail pitifully. "Everything hurts, like it's tearing me to pieces from the inside." Miranda immediately crept over to her bedside and spoke closer. "Get some rest. Here is the most modern medicine for you. You take it. Everything will go away. Everything will stop hurting. Good for you." As if letting go, muttered the grandmother a moment after the girl's words. "Of course," confirmed Miranda. "The pain will go away now. You sleep. You'll wake up and forget everything." Soon the old woman stopped moaning. She sang and even curled up under the blanket. Miranda realized that the nightmare had receded. Once again, the grandmother slept peacefully until morning. But the next day, her granddaughter did not ask her about the nightmare. Determined not to awaken her memories, Miranda took the experiment seriously. She kept a notebook in which she noted how often she talked to Clara in her sleep, how quickly she calmed down, whether the attack was repeated, and soon noticed from her notes that the nightmares in which she managed to wedge in repeated less and less often, and after a few months and disappeared altogether. This encouraged the young explorer even more, in her for a flicker of hope that it will be possible to completely cure her grandmother of night attacks. And soon this hope was confirmed. Nightmares began to visit her less and less often. Sometimes Miranda slept through the night without her screams. Sometimes you only had to get up to her once a night. But there was no more like the beginning of last fall, when Slaga read every 2 o'clock. Miranda considered it her small victory. Not always the girl managed to calm the old woman with the first time to pick up the words. For example, when Clara started calling for her husband and screaming to let him go, she usually had to be woken up. "Miranda, I tried telling her your husband wasn't taking him anywhere." But the old woman didn't believe it. She'd spent too many years without her husband. She remembered the separation too well. The phrase, "We'll figure it all out and bring your husband back." No one of Slava's age would have believed such a statement from the law enforcement officers. Miranda went through the phrases. I wrote down the unsuccessful ones. Finally, she guessed to address her grandmother as if on behalf of her grandfather and promise her that he would surely survive and they would meet again. Soon after this discovery, Clara's most agonizing nightmare gradually let her go. Before the start of the school year, Cindy Larkin suggested that her daughter move her grandmother from her bedroom back into the pass-through room, but Miranda refused. She reported to her mother that Clara had become a much more restful sleeper. Cindy had noted this herself, although her daughter's room was away from the bedroom. At first, she often heard the usual night noises from there, but by the end of the summer, such episodes became fewer and fewer. After rejection, she was glad several times to the door of her room at night, hearing her mother's voice and eavesdropping on what was going on. Finding out what was going on, Cindy Larkins pondered the situation and went to hold a consultation with the local paramedic. He approved of Miranda's methodology. The doctor talked to the girl, read her diary of observations of her grandmother, asked about the results, and afterwards he praised Miranda fervently, saying that if she continued her experiment, she would be able to cure her grandmother completely. He explained for a long time how and why the method invented by Miranda works. He said some wise words the girl did not understand even half of it. But she did. She's on the right track. A year later, a peaceful sleep returned to Kendall's house. She stopped screaming at night. And if she had a nightmare, the family knew how to calm her down quickly. They didn't tell the grandmother herself. They just tried to treat her as kindly as possible. Miranda could be proud of herself, but she had no time for that. She judged the paramedic for a while to explain to her how things had turned out in simple words. To the medic's credit, he did not dismiss the curious girl and managed to lay out his assumptions for her. In addition, he recommended several popular scientific publications from which you can understand how the human psyche works. The subject fascinated Miranda, and she plunged headlong into the study of psychology. First on the basics, and then more seriously. By the end of school, the girl already knew exactly what she wanted to devote her life to and did not retreat from her decision. All this long story Miranda told the parents of her future son-in-law. Of course, it was much shorter. Although David constantly intervened in the narration, clarified the details, drew the listener's attention to the details. He himself had heard this story not for the first time and liked it very much. He admired the ingenuity of little Miranda, the selflessness with which she took to help her grandmother, the patience and warmth of heart she showed during her impromptu healing session. "I would never have thought of this at 11 years old," the young man exclaimed. Among other things, David was struck by the very history of the Kendall family. Born in the mid-90s, he had not seen the Soviet Union, and about repressions, camps, persecutions on ethnic grounds. He knew the KGB and NKVD only through excerpts from old movies and history books. It was strange for the young boy to encounter people who had actually seen and experienced all this. He was especially surprised that these people were not stale old men, but quite cheerful and adequate people. His future father-in-law and mother-in-law, Kelly and John. Miranda's story impressed him too. After it, they had a long conversation about the vicissitudes of fate, about how childhood events influenced the choice of profession, about the Soviet era, about human kindness. The discussion of the wedding was not just on the second, but on the 10th plan. But the conversation turned out to be sincere and heartfelt. And by feelings, Jenkins brought the future relatives closer, despite their difference in age, education, and social status. After all, that was the purpose of the joint dinner. So at least, reasoned Miranda, parted at 0 o'clock for the city elders left by cab. David stayed at the bride's apartment. They are Sonny sent the parents to bed, and themselves cleaned the table, went through the dishes, tidied up the living room and kitchen. The guy thought that he was obliged to help the future relatives, at least in this, since he was not allowed to help in the organization of the dinner, which was held for him, and therefore he did not know that, returning home, his mother said to her husband, "How do you like that? John, we're going to have a hereditary Jewess in our family, and from a family with a criminal record." I was hoping David would find a better match. "Okay," John responded to you. He didn't pick anything. He's in love with this thread and her family wholeheartedly. Do you care if she's Jewish or Turkish with a criminal record or a spotless one? They have plenty of money. Pensions for doctors of sciences, a decent apartment. You've seen for yourself what a great party they are in material terms. And you and I don't need anything else. We decided to get married in 6 months in September. I didn't want beautiful fall photos under the dress. David was not against it, and parents amicably decided not to hinder the newlyweds and not to impose their ideas about the celebration. While the bride and groom were saving money for the party, outfits, treats, and a bachelorette party, it was decided long ago that after the wedding, the young people will live at Jenkins and save money for the down payment on the mortgage. And they should have thought about their careers. Both boys had little seniority, couldn't afford to borrow much money from the bank, and the salaries were not such that painlessly pay off the loan for housing. Miranda and Sebastian were completely satisfied with this solution. They found it reasonable in their large apartment with 3 isolated rooms. There was enough space for both parents and the young family. But the out-of-towners didn't like the idea for some reason. But openly, they did not express their protests. John, in mail conversations with Sebastian, he periodically complained that the son does not act according to the rules. They said that a man should bring his wife to his house and not move to her. Jenkins on these speeches only guffawed. It's all prejudice and long out of date. John came in, on the other hand. But a young family, come to think of it, they want to make some noise sometimes. But during this very time, and there are parents behind the wall, you have to admit, it's embarrassing. Imagine yourself in such a situation and will never have grandchildren. You've been here, John. Sebastian wondered. From the thread and the room to our half of the apartment. How noisy do you have to be for us to hear, unless you yell into a microphone? Would the guests want to invite us to a party? I guess, John. People need a place to gather with their friends. Or they'll just sit up late watching TV, and you'll be noisy at 0 o'clock. We're fine, smiled Jenkins. Yeah, agreed, was John. I remember Miranda wasn't used to being kept up at night by the noise from the in-laws. Sebastian gave his companion a serious look, raised an eyebrow questioningly. I mean that she could endure the inconvenience for a long time for the sake of the people closest to her and not say anything to them about it. Tactfully, I'm a woman, John quickly mouthed and curtailed the subject. There was no need to quarrel with the future in-laws yet. Kelly was more subtle. Over a cup of tea, she could complain to Miranda. David, the other day, my boy was frying cutlets. I come in. Oh my goodness. The whole kitchen's smoky. The stove's got grease on the coffee. Splashes on the table flowers scattered. And he sits in front of a mountain of cutlets and says I'm treating my mom. And he doesn't notice what he's turned the kitchen into. You have to be such a Bezrukov. Grown-ups are already on the torture. You're with him, Miranda. Not scared. He was joking. Kelly, You haven't seen what goes on in our kitchen. After Sebastian's fish fry, the man is incorrigible. Kelly nodded, but by the next meeting, she'd start all over again, all over me. Would you be comfortable living with Slovaks? After all, a stranger in the house, and besides, a young man just so from the morning from the bedroom in a nightgown will not jump out of the bedroom. I have never been in the habit of jumping out of the bedroom unclothed, Miranda objected softly. David is no stranger to us. He's stayed overnight, or on weekends more than once. We've never been inconvenienced. Don't worry, Kelly. No worries at all. It's one thing to have him as a guest, and quite another to have him as a permanent resident. And that you're getting tired of this topic being mooted. You guys can't have a life. You yourself understand it perfectly well. And to rent an apartment, it is not rational at their incomes that the newlyweds settled for the city could not be out of the question. Everyone understood that. The David family lived in a two-room adjoining Khrushchevka, where the guy owned a passageway room. When he was a teenager, he tried to persuade his father to make repairs and isolate his room. But John quickly explained to his son the unreality of this idea. Expensive, messy, troublesome. The room would be cramped. The apartment will be blocked by a dark, long corridor, which is not used rationally. In addition, because of this, redevelopment will reduce the living area of their Khrushchevka, which will lead to a drop in its value. In short, unprofitable from all sides. David then reconciled, blocked off part of the room with a closet, thus allocating himself a personal space, and about the repair shut up. Later, getting acquainted with Robert, he sometimes regretted that he did not show insistence to bring the girl in a separate room. Although tiny, it still goes anywhere, but in the country behind the closet is simply impossible. The current hints of David's parents only annoyed, especially since for the city expressed their thoughts not only Jenkins Sr., but also Netta. For example, one day Kelly took the future daughter-in-law to the cat show, and their threads looked at one of the kittens, a red and fluffy Maine Coon. The girl more than half an hour stood near his cage, admiring and pleasing. So let's buy him, Kelly suggested. I'll add to you if you don't have enough. You can't, sighed Lisa. Dad's allergic to cats. Then get the breeder's contacts and buy one after the wedding, Kelly suggested. And then, as if she'd come to her senses, she added, "Oh, you'll be living with your parents anyway. If only you had your own apartment." Slowly, Kelly and John put their future daughters-in-law into the family's heads. The idea that the young ones needed their own place. Eventually, Miranda got fed up with it. She summoned the town's spouses for a talk, and she called David and Robert and her husband. "Kelly, John," she began, "we've all noticed that you don't like the prospect of David living in our apartment after the wedding. Let's discuss this situation once and for all. First, let's admit to each other that we have no alternatives. The young people will not be able to live with you. This will inevitably lead to domestic conflicts. We are not in a position to buy an apartment. We don't have that kind of money. We do not intend to exchange our existing housing. You, as far as I understand, you also do not have the financial means to evict David. Otherwise, you would have done it a long time ago." John shook his head. "No," he admitted, "except for a down payment. We could scrape together a studio of some kind." "Not a studio," Lisa resented. "If you're going to mess with the mortgage, then buy a full-fledged apartment, albeit one room these to fly. Where is the room combined with the kitchen? Well, we'd probably add something to your money for a down payment, but we don't have a lot of money. I warn you, we'll get a one-room Khrushchevka somewhere in the suburbs, and the guys are still more comfortable living in the center. It's not far to work, and there's all the infrastructure. They can't rent an apartment and save for a mortgage at the same time. So, I believe, moving in with us, David, is the only sensible decision, especially since the children made it themselves. We expect it won't be for long." David cut in. 5 years at the most. But that's me calculating the worst-case scenarios. Moreover, said Sebastian, we will help by providing housing and not requiring the kids to contribute to the household expenses, so as not to slow down the rate of savings, but I would object to the expenses, said David. I don't like to be a freeloader, and we will discuss it. If necessary, Miranda responded immediately. That's what the situation looks like so far. Maybe you see some other ways to solve it that the four of us don't see. She turned to Kelly with John, for the townspeople looked at each other, shrugged confusedly. Not yet, it seemed, Kelly said. In that case, let's consider it a done deal, Jenkins summarized. And please don't start any more conversations about how inconvenient it is for anyone or how wrong it is in general. It's tedious and uncomfortable, Smith's words added, and almost with glee. Kelly and John had to agree before the wedding. They kept their heads down and didn't broach the subject of bridal real estate again. All the more did not remember the idea to organize on the day of their marriage. For Kelly and John, the future mother-in-law was only in favor, but he himself categorically did not want a second ceremony. Realizing that the man cannot change his mind, Lisa said, well, and the hell with it, come up with something more interesting. And came up with as a bachelorette party arranged all the close women, including Miranda and Kelly, masked photo shoot in wedding dresses. For this event, she invited several makeup artists and hairdressers, conspired with a rental salon to provide outfits and space, and with a nearby restaurant. About a small buffet. The ladies were a little shy at first, but the champagne abundance of outfits around did their job. Soon, everyone invited. With pleasure and excitement, tried on dresses, posed for photographers, tested unusual makeup. The party turned out very girlish and yet romantic. No, she was pleased. And Kelly later told her in confidence that even re-registration with her husband would not have given her so much joy and pleasure. In short, there was no time to discuss where the new family would live. However, John had prepared a surprise for the wedding dinner. The dinner was modest. Only the young people and their parents celebrated the marriage. With friends, David and Robert decided the next day, and immediately after the registry office and photo shoot went with their relatives to a cozy restaurant, David, in the city of excellent cuisine and service of extra class. When the turn came to handing out gifts, the new father-in-law solemnly rose from his seat and said, guys, I decided as a gift to buy you an apartment. Here are the documents. He held out to the newlyweds a thin folder. I thought, he continued, that my savings are enough either for a ready-made studio or a two-bedroom. But for the construction phase, I mean the down payment. Of course, I wouldn't be able to afford the whole thing. But so far my earnings are stable, and one good contract should be coming up soon. So I got in touch with a real estate developer. And now we have a 2-room apartment near the center. True, the house is still at the foundation stage, but the builder is reliable. I checked. It's scheduled for completion in 2 years. They're giving it to you with renovation. Just move in and live. Once it's built, now we'll register the house with you. In the meantime, the loan is on me, and I'll pay. It's a gift after all. The news made a lot of noise around the table. Robert and her husband and parents went to see the house under construction a couple of days later. The new building was indeed very well located in the so-called quiet center. The neighborhood was green and cozy. Not far from the house were stores of basic necessities. Kindergarten school. There was a prospective apartment in the next block. Sebastian grinned, and with grandchildren will be comfortable to live. And the manager who accompanied them would also confirm. We have in the project provides wheelchairs on the first floor ramps at each porch and a great playground in a closed courtyard. And the whole territory is under video surveillance. You can even let one child go for a walk and not worry about his safety. Jenkins' senior impression and nodded approvingly. She didn't let this information pass her ears. She looked at the floor plans with curiosity, looked for her future apartment on the floor plan. And when she found it, it seems that she immediately began to arrange the furniture there in her imagination. A representative of the developer took the families to a neighboring building, recently commissioned by his company. Some of the apartments in it were still empty, and it was possible to get inside and look at the renovation by the builders, and generally assess the quality of housing. After this trip, even David, who had previously been skeptical about his father's gift, felt grateful to John and began to dream of moving. "Great," Sebastian exclaimed on the way home. "Here he was being a friend to you, and here's a royal gift for you guys. But for now, he's not splurging too much." "It's cool," Miranda noticed. "At the foundation stage, these apartments are cheap enough. Not a penny, of course. But for our 3-bedroom, we can get 3 2-bedrooms like this. He'll splurge later when he starts paying off the loan." I suggested to my father that we pay off the loan. David responded immediately, but he refused. He said it was his gift. It was the best we could do. "What is this? Us taking over the mortgage after we move in? When the apartment's built, when it's finished, my dad'll transfer it to us. We'll live and pay for it then. Until then, he's on his own." "Is it a big payment?" asked Sebastian, and hearing the amount, whistled delightedly. "Almost my entire pension," shocked the matchmaker. "He says that as long as his income allows," David explained. "Yes, he is also counting on some contract with Europe, which will supposedly provide him and my mom with income for eternity. I don't know much about his business affairs," finished the young man, a little embarrassed. "You don't need it. You have your own work to do," Miranda reassured her son-in-law. "But God willing, it will all work out. Basically, nothing has changed yet," Lisa said thoughtfully. "We are still living with you and still saving money. Only now it's not for the mortgage, but for renovation and furniture. Let's see how this developer shows himself. Although it will be a pity, of course, if something is delayed." That was that. David settled down in Robert's room, moved his things and computer, and set up his own workspace. He really got along with his wife's parents without any problems. Of course, there were some little things in terms of everyday life, which had to get used to anew. But it was perceived and mighty with his father-in-law as an inevitable stage of lapping, and did not cause violent emotions. In general, the two families coexisted in one apartment quite peacefully. On weekdays, they did not see each other very often. The young ones worked late, and after work they usually went to some events like concerts in bars, theater performances, or just visiting friends. The older generation had their own thing going on. Sebastian continued to work part-time at his institute, and on weekends he went fishing, including in winter. Julia counseled privately and worked with students, helping them write academic papers and conducting research. Officially, the Jenkins seniors were retired, but they could not imagine life without work. Once a month, the families would stop by the construction site and were pleased to see that the house where their apartment would be located was coming up. The construction was strictly on schedule, and in some aspects even ahead of schedule. And David and Robert gradually got used to the idea that they would live here. Little by little, they got acquainted with the neighborhood, planned the situation in the future housing. Even Robert's parents had already accepted the idea and were discussing their children's plans with no less enthusiasm than they were. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Moreover, John made regular installments on the loan to the builder. Thus passed about half a year. Towards spring, the Jenkins noticed that John had become nervous and anxious. Sebastian called him for a conversation and learned at the conclusion of the contract with European partners, on which the man had pinned so much hope, for some reason stalled. "We'll have to tighten our belts, it seems," sighed the matchmaker. "With the current customer, we have a contract ends in May. Will he renew it or not? We don't know yet, and it's not a very convenient customer. In general, he will get discounts from us when renewing. How's that sound? And where will I get them from? We're already working with him at almost cost price. I also bought some equipment specifically for the Europeans. The money is spent, and the equipment is idle." They didn't know what John Jenkins was doing. Even David couldn't explain to them the specifics of his father's company, some kind of small production. But what kind of manufacturing? What does it produce and who does it sell to? No one knew. John himself, starting to talk about the work, began to rush with obscure terms, from which the interlocutors quickly tired. So his explanations did not add clarity, But Sebastian understood the holy financial crisis. "John, with the mortgage as you pull so far or help?" he asked. "Pulled until God willing," the man responded. However, a couple months later, John came to Jenkins and said to Sebastian, "Listen, Saint, help. I can't take any more credit. I scraped together the last pennies for the last payment, and I don't know where to get money for the next one. I work alone. You know, Kelly, we're all looking out for ourselves. She's no help at all." "What are you talking about, John?" Sebastian exclaimed. "I'll help, of course. We're not strangers. And the apartment is being built not only for your son, but also for my daughter. Tell me where to transfer and by what date. I'll do it." "Thanks, my brother-in-law helped me out. By next month I'll have it up and running," John promised. "Oh, and don't tell the kids, please. It's embarrassing. He said it was a small gift for the wedding, and now he's left with nothing." "I won't tell," Sebastian reassured his relative. "I'm not going to tell you, I guess. I have a stash that my wife doesn't know about, just for such occasions, so don't worry. We'll save your reputation." John thanked Jenkins profusely. He promised it was just a one-time thing. By the next installment, everything would be fine. But it turned out that Sebastian paid for the apartment under construction for the next year. John returned his money to him only twice, and then, not completely discouraged, and with the crisis in his company, David and Robert said nothing. The guys continued to travel regularly to the construction site and plan the move. The building where their future apartment was located was already erected, and they were excitedly measuring the floor among the still bare concrete walls and deciding where to put the sofa, where to place the table, and in which corner a floor lamp would look better. Jenkins didn't want to deprive them of this joy, but Miranda had to confess her collusion with the saint. There is no wife who doesn't know about her spouse's stash, even if it's kept in a bank account and managed solely from a private office. Miranda noticed that her husband began to look more often than usual into the internet bank, which he had not used before, that by a certain day of the month he began to check the status of his cards, to transfer something somewhere. She didn't bother with suspicions. She just asked directly. Sebastian, who was not used to having secrets from his wife, gave in at once. Jenkins listened to the story, thought a little, and said thoughtfully, "God forbid that everything should be all right," and ended with an incomprehensible phrase for her husband: "Good that you transfer the money from your account, not cash." However, Sebastian did not pay attention to this remark. A few more months passed before John showed up at Jenkins with a penitent look. He arrived on a weekend when the entire population of the apartment and the younger and older ones were home. Gathering everyone in the kitchen, he began to get upset. "Came to apologize, comrades. The contract I had so hoped for is obviously no more. With old clients, my contracts are over. All in all, my firm is almost bankrupt. I've decided to sell it for a blood loss. I'm sorry, guys, I know I promised you, but I'm not holding out." "How do you mean sell it?" David was surprised. "What do you mean?" "Directly," John said sadly. "I'll put it up for sale under an assignment agreement, so sell it to us. Lisa found it right away. We will continue to pay off the loan." "And what will I use to pay off my work debts?" John sighed. "I can't charge you for the apartment. I'll take it from an outside buyer, especially since I already have one in mind. But I'm sorry, guys, I know you were hoping. But I promise you, as soon as things get better, I'll buy you a better apartment than this one." Robert and David and Sebastian. There was a lot of noise for a while, suggesting options. Miranda was silent, scrutinizing the matchmaker. Sebastian came out to escort John to the entrance and asked in a low voice, "Hey, matchmaker, and my money, which I gave for the loan, will you give back from the sale?" We'll decide, said the city quickly. "I'm in a hurry. I'm running." A longing settled in the Jenkins apartment. The young people were upset and discouraged. They were too used to thinking of this new building as their own. They had too many plans for it. Sebastian was worried about the money he'd spent for nothing. John, after apologizing, hadn't visited in over a month, and he was unavailable by phone. Kelly made long conversations, but did not report on her husband's affairs, claiming that she knew nothing about them. One evening, after making sure the children were firmly entrenched in their room, Miranda called her husband into the kitchen and handed him some printouts. "What are these?" Sebastian asked, puzzled. "It's data from the Roserister website," she explained. "John our faraway sold. Even before he repented to us, he came the day before. He didn't mention the debts. He didn't say anything to you. When I asked him, he said we'll figure it out. That's all." Sebastian studied the documents, then shook his head in confusion. "He's a fraud, our matchmaker, sadly," Miranda summarized. "Why did you jump right in?" "Sebastian, the man's in a financial crisis. What's in it for him?" He embarrassed himself. He embarrassed himself in front of his kids. He doesn't give a damn about his kids or ours. Miranda was angry. And Sebastian's benefit is very simple and transparent. He bought this apartment at the foundation stage 1.5 years ago. Since then, and the dollar rate has grown, and the situation on the real estate market has changed, and the apartment has gone up. I saw it myself. The house is almost ready. Now this 2-bedroom is $6 million more expensive than when he bought it. I checked. Look at this. John took out a loan with no down payment. There was a developer's promotion, and he only made 5 6-month payments. So he didn't spend more than $200,000. And now he sold the apartment, paid off the rest of the loan, and got about $4 million. That's a nice profit. In 1.5 years with that kind of investment, it's a good profit, Sebastian agreed. But what makes you think it's fraud? That he thought it all out in advance and acted, as they say, in self-interest. Yes, if only because he hasn't paid you back yet. Even though he has the money from the sale, Miranda replied reasonably. It's been a month, by the way. And he hasn't even shown his face to us. Everyone hides during that time. Apparently, he's not going to give anything back. What was the point of the whole show to promise the kids an apartment? He could have just bought it for himself, waited for it to go up in value and sold it. Sebastian, but you're like a little kid, really. The woman didn't know whether to be angry or upset. Without the show, he'd have to pay the mortgage himself. So most of his mortgage was paid for. You figure you're paying for your daughter's house. Sebastian didn't have time to answer. The door opened and David came into the kitchen. "David, I'm sorry," he said, slightly embarrassed, but more wary. "I overheard part of your conversation. Sebastian, is that right? You paid the mortgage instead of your father." Jenkins nodded. "And he didn't pay you back?" The boy kept asking. Sebastian shook his head. David lowered his eyes. He was quiet for a moment. "We have some savings," he said. Finally, "How much does your father owe you?" "I can pay you back that money. There are savings and well," grumbled Sebastian. "Let it sit. It'll come in handy. A son can't answer for his father, can he?" The man winked mockingly at his son-in-law. "And I'll pay for my mistakes myself. Maybe I'll still be able to persuade John." "Let me talk to him myself," David suggested. "It's easier for me. I don't think he's hiding from me." "Talk if you want to," Miranda nodded. "I don't think so. Are you really going to convince him of anything?" "That money wasn't good for us," Sebastian explained. "I mean, it wasn't the last money we gave him. No offense. It was just a rainy day fund. You know, age. You gotta be prepared for all sorts of illnesses and stuff. But it's a shame. David, you know." "I understand," nodded the guy. "I'm offended and ashamed too. I thought you were going to call me out of the house after all this, and Robert. I'll talk to my dad," he finished and stalked out of the kitchen. John really wasn't hiding from his son, but he laughed at his requests to return the money he'd paid Jenkins. "What money are you talking about?" He was surprised. "I didn't borrow from him. I didn't give him any receipts. I didn't promise to pay him back. He offered to help me when he found out about my difficulties. So I took him up on it. So he thought he was paying the rent for me and the thread. The boy objected. But what did he think? Stretched John mockingly. Yes, I promised you that apartment. But I overdid it. I didn't calculate my possibilities. But it was registered to me. So I'm the owner. I bought it when I wanted, sold it when I wanted. What's your beef? So you bought it with someone else's money. David was outraged. And why someone else's? Explain, shook his head father. A relative helped me. A close person. Do you consider him a stranger too? You live in his house, don't you? Aren't you ashamed? So pay back your relative. David tried his best to speak calmly, not reacting to his father's taunts. And you prove that it was a debt. John grinned. There was no debt. It was voluntary contributions. That was nice of the family. There was no debt. At last the men shouted at each other, and their conversation turned into a real quarrel. David achieved nothing for his father-in-law, but firmly promised his father that until Sebastian got his money back, he would not communicate with his father. A great loss. John followed the offspring. That night he called Jenkins and expressed his displeasure. What are you, a matchmaker? You're turning my son against me, he said reproachfully. I thought you were in my position. I agree to wait while I sort out my finances, and you not only started to beat your pennies out of me, but also David against me. I didn't expect that kind of meanness. The conversation was on speakerphone. Sebastian was fiddling with a word at the moment of the call and his hands were dirty. David, hearing his father's complaints, was lazy. How can you have a conscience? He shouted into the phone. You're a liar and a cheat. We'll sue you in court, you say, snorted John. Son against father. But sue over laughing lawyers. And he disconnected. Uncle Sebastian, I think you should really file a complaint against him, David said, in a passionate voice. He won't give the money back in kind. David, what's the point of all this squabbling? Jenkins said sadly. You and your father are going to get in trouble. Honestly, I don't want anything to do with him. After that, he left David with a thread to play on our nerves. Lied to your eyes. Deprived you of your savings. He thought I might lose my beloved wife after such tricks. What are you doing with Miranda? You won't let me in the door. Like hell you wouldn't. He didn't care. I don't want anything to do with him. After that. Don't get hot, David, don't get hot, Sebastian reassured him. Not sure what else to say, but his son-in-law had already decided to act. The firm where David worked as an engineer had a legal department. He went there, described his situation to the staff, and asked them to recommend a good lawyer who could help his family recover a debt from his ex-family. In principle, I could do it, said one of the trust employees, Charles, thoughtfully. I've dealt with similar situations before, but I'd have to talk to yours first. I could do it today, the guy said cheerfully. Just Charles, if you need anything. You work for my father-in-law for free. As a friendship, so to speak, and we'll settle the fee issue separately, if we win the case or even bring the court costs from the defendant. Don't worry, smiled the lawyer, but I accept the deal. You don't want to worry the old people. So, they are already worried, sighed David. Charles did not spend too long talking to Jenkins. First of all, he clarified for himself how Sebastian had made the payment on David's loan to his father. When he found out that the money was transferred directly to the mortgage account from Sebastian's card, he was happy. That's great, he exclaimed. This is direct evidence that you transferred funds to the defendant. And not just for nothing, but for specific purposes. Receipts of transfers prove that you participated in the purchase of his apartment, so you're entitled to a share of the sale. Print them out for me, please. Sebastian was hesitant to sue his son-in-law's father. It seemed awkward to him, but his wife and David convinced him. And the man that same evening, with the help of Charles, wrote a pre-trial complaint to John. The document was sent by registered mail, but there was no response from the city. Then Sebastian, again with the assistance of a lawyer, wrote a statement of claim. To it, they enclosed copies of documents on the apartment and the extract from Roserister, found in the network Miranda and receipts for transfers, and a copy of the claim and a receipt for sending it. The lawyer took all these papers to the district court the next day. Additionally, David attached to the package of documents a flash drive with audio recording of his conversation with his father voice recorder in his phone. He then turned it on just in case. Knowing the character of John, he could agree to something and a date later refuse to retract his words. The guy thought the recording would help him avoid that. He didn't even think about a trial at that time. But the audio came in handy. Charles said it would be another argument in Jenkins' favor. The trial took several months and cost the family a lot of heartache. Kelly and John regularly called the Jenkinses and asked them to settle the case amicably. They offered to wait. They threatened, tried to scandalize. But Sebastian and Miranda were adamant, although the elderly woman often had to take sedatives after such calls. They upset her too much. Miranda was too worried that she couldn't see the true nature of her new relatives in time. "Mom, why were you soothing her? Robert, you're not a psychic after all. How could you have known there was so much dirt in them?" "Exactly. David, I've been around them for years, and I didn't expect this kind of meanness. They're my parents." "You don't understand," Jenkins joked. "This is a big professional setback for me. I'm a psychologist with a long experience, with a doctorate. And it's unthinkable to misjudge people like this. Psychologist, you've been exhorting on the job. And outside of work, you're an ordinary woman. And like every human being, you have the right to make a mistake. So give yourself permission to exercise it." Miranda nodded, agreed. But each subsequent call threw her off balance. Not for nothing. Oh, not for nothing. She'd been so worried before her first visit for the city's scarecrow of heart to their home. She thought, but all things must come to an end. So did litigation. The Jenkins won the battle. The court ordered John to pay the full amount Sebastian spent on his loan, plus legal fees. It took some more time to fight with the bailiffs, who were supposed to collect the money and return it to its rightful owners. David was already at war with this service. Sebastian had no time to bother the bailiffs on a daily basis, and his health no longer allowed him to perform such active and energetic actions. So David appointed himself the legal representative of his father-in-law. 3 months passed after the court decision came into legal force. When the money finally arrived in the Jenkins account, the message about the deposit was read to Sebastian at dinner and was greeted with applause by the family. "I checked at the bank office, and everything is indeed in order," the man said. "And I was thinking, since we have such a sum, and you have some savings, should we not get involved in the mortgage again? Only now we're going to do it by the book. Miranda and I will give you a down payment. You'll make more of your own, won't you? You'll be able to buy a 2-bedroom. Not as luxurious as in that new building, but quite decent. After all, a young family should live in their own home. Is that what you wanted?" To be honest, Sebastian hesitantly began, "David, we didn't really want to sit around. It was Aunt Kelly who gave me a headache, a vacation, and I'm so into this new apartment. But I actually like it better at home. I'm used to it. And so is David. Not if we're disturbing you." "What are you?" "Lisa," Miranda exclaimed. "You're not disturbing us at all, but it's for your convenience." The young couple looked at each other, and there was a certain cunning in their glances. "But if it's for our convenience," said Lisa in a slightly strained voice, "then hold on. For our convenience, it would be better not to move out, but to live together with you, because David and I are going to have a child soon, and we are counting on your help with him." She looked at the changed face of her parents and added in the tone of a mom, "Well, please, I'm afraid that I won't be able to cope with the baby alone." "What's the conversation about?" Lisa Sebastian was glowing with happiness. "We'll help you with your grandson. Don't worry. The mother will refuse. I'm still good for something. Why would I refuse?" Miranda smiled. "I'm very much in favor. I'm not used to staying awake at night at the bedside of my loved ones. Just Lisa, for God's sake. Don't send the father to register the baby, and don't send David either. Just in case. Believe me, in my experience, it's a matter for the mother to handle on her own.